Savvy. We are here today to talk about Spider-Man 3, which is the 2007 film, end to the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy. And yeah, we've been loving this the last few weeks. These have been an absolute, just amazing time going back to these films. Films that are very, very near and dear to our heart. And going back to them, we already have like reviews on these films that we did years ago. We wanted to go back, revisit them, kind of update our reviews on them. Maybe our reviews and opinions have changed on them, but I think across the board they've mostly remained consistent. And of course, we're capping off the trilogy today with Spider-Man 3. This isn't going to be the end of the Spider-Man reviews. You've got the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 in the lead up to Far From Home. Not Far From Home, No Way Home, sorry. God, those home titles are so confusing. They're so interchangeable, aren't they? And of course, Spider-Man 3, which it's quite a divisive one. It has its fans. I think it has a whole new host of fans now with Meme Generation, which we'll talk about as we get into it. But yeah, this is going to be a fun one to go into. A lot of old memories to sort of get out there and nostalgia. But before we do so, over to George with the socials.
Absolutely, guys. So, comment all your thoughts on this film. I've said it's been out for quite a while now, so you don't need to worry about spoilers or anything. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, just get them out there. Thoughts at the time, has it evolved? All that kind of stuff. It's going to be very interesting talking this film tonight. And of course, as Chris said, we've got a few more Spider reviews on the way. Do subscribe. There's a lot more coming. We've got a playlist called The Journey's I keep saying Far From Home as well. It technically is Far From Home. It's a lot further from home than probably the actual Far From Home film was. And also, there was no way he could get home in the second one, which doesn't really help. So, yeah, that's a conversation for another time. But check out the playlist. Everything is going to be on there. And I guess we can say we've got some dates for reviews coming up. We mentioned last time we may have to change The Amazing Spider-Man 2 for all those desperate to hear us talk about that. That's going to come out on Sunday, the 12th of December now, just because the film is out in the UK on Wednesday, the 15th at the time of recording. Ticket sales went up this morning at midnight. It's been very chaotic. Yeah, they've been booked. There are trips booked. There are people in America selling them on eBay for $20,000. Don't know who or why, but it's ridiculous. And they're on sale now. People, if you haven't already bought them by the time the video comes up, there's a good chance you're not going on release day. So you've only got yourself to blame. Mm-hmm. But that being said, we're going to get our review out for that film on Thursday, the 16th of December.
I think that's right. Yeah,
I think that's the right date. And we're going to do spoilers. We'll put it in the description, but we'll want to talk about it. And again, to you American viewers, I'm really not sorry. So that is where we're going to be with this. And if you are new to us, if you don't know what we do, obviously we're a film channel. All our videos we always put across social media. And we're going to get them run across the screen now for Twitter at cinema_savvy, Facebook and letterboxd.com/cinema_savvy. And we have a link to TeePublic in that description below too. Do check that out on there. There is a Marvel themed top, not a Spider-Man themed top, but if you're going to be wearing Spider-Man merch at the opening night, send us photos if it's the correct Spider-Man. So, as I said, that's going to be a discussion for another time, but I could potentially the biggest film of the year. What we think could be the biggest film of the year. It's out of that and Bond, and I think it could hit $1 billion. But again, we're still a few weeks away from that because we're back revisiting 2007. And as always, we start with our memories. Chris, do you care to talk about this one?
I do. Out of the Sam Raimi trilogy, this is the only one that I went to see at the cinema. Which I've mentioned other weeks. I'm so embarrassed about that I never went to see at least Spider-Man 2 in the cinema. I think I was too young to see the first one in cinema with the whole 12 rating, which we talked about that week. This film was massive. I remember 2007 very, very well. It was the cap off at what we thought at the time. Well, it was the cap off to this trilogy. It was also the cap off to another trilogy, which was Pirates of the Caribbean at World's End. So that year just stays in my mind for the end of two massive trilogies and the hype building up to them, the trailers and everything. I remember seeing this on opening day, or at least opening weekend. I'm pretty sure I went on opening day though for this, and the whole cinema was packed. Everyone was into it. Everyone was hyped for it, and it felt like an event. It felt like this is the big one. And if we're going by numbers, I know that originally, they had Spider-Man 4 planned, 5 and 6, and we've wept tears of sadness at what will never be. But we knew there were going to be more, but you always go by that number, don't you? Like 3 is going to be the last one. It's a trilogy. So I went in with that mindset. All the plot lines that had been built up from the end of 2 with like the Harry Osborn stuff. We knew that Sandman was going to be in there, and Venom, if you gave a shit, Venom was also in there. Everything but the kitchen sink. So there was a huge to-do and initial hype going into it. And we still have that with films, and that's what I'm hoping that I get with this new Spider-Man film. I don't think it will be on the same level, but the fact that we might be seeing some old faces, well, we know that we're seeing some old faces, it's getting to that kind of thing. And I do think that Spider-Man has that, it can achieve that level of hype and get people in seats. And we know that it has, because booking tickets last night was an absolute nightmare, but we managed to do it. But during this film, I was pretty conscious at the time and afterwards that I know I didn't like this as much as the first or the second, and that still stays to this day. I think it's fair to say, this is the weakest one of the three by a country mile, but I still enjoy it. And I'm still like that now. I think a lot of people are overly harsh with this film. There are some bad things in this film. There are some very questionable things in this film. I do think that over time, though, meme generation, which we'll talk about in just a second, people have found that appreciation for it now. It's almost like the Star Wars prequels. They hated them at the time, but you kind of come around to it eventually and reach acceptance with it. But I think some people are really unnecessarily harsh on this film. And I think we've had way worse comic book films than this one. I still think the action delivers. I think on a lot of the emotional beats, the film still delivers. It just kind of struggles to find its footing, and it meanders, and it feels very unfocused. And you're going to have that when you've got 1,000,001 producers, although one in particular, who I'm sure's name will come up in this review,
Yeah.
um, you know, asking for a certain villain to be included. I think that Raimi's original idea would have been absolutely fine, but I think it's still a very, very entertaining and good, overall good superhero film, despite being the weakest one of the three. And it's a tough act to follow as well, because I mean, Spider-Man 1 and 2, even by today, going back to it, they're still up there in terms of the best comic book movies ever made. So even if this one isn't as good, it's still damn good in my opinion. But
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating discussion looking at the landscape of not just cinema but comic book films since this film's come out, because even when this came out, there were already worse films. There was Fantastic Four, which I don't think aged as
both of
well
them.
as any of the other ones. X-Men 3, The Last Stand. Of course, I've been given the worst one. Wolverine. Oh, that was 2008 Wolverine, wasn't it? Or a 2009. But
2009, I think that was, yeah.
yeah, it's one of them where I think before we hit live, we kind of said this, that I didn't realize people dislike this film until I got older. And sort of going back to my memories of this, I distinctly I remember blurs of the first two. Spider-Man 3 was the one. And I think you are right, event films, the term. I do think the new one's gonna have event level status. I would have loved to have seen its box office without there being a pandemic. I would argue it could have hit 2 billion. I think this is going to be the first one to get past 1 billion. It's a conversation for later in this month, but this is, I believe, the second film I ever saw on the release date. Now, at that age, when you don't have a job, and you don't do it as obvious now, that is an unbelievable concept that you're going to the cinema on the release date of a film. The film that I did it before it was episode 3 of this for obvious reasons, and I watched this at the same cinema as Spider-Man 2, Solihull Cinema, which is still there. Anytime I ever go to Solihull, I just have distinct memories of Spider-Man 3 and just, well, not growing up near there, but having relatives there, but always Spider-Man 3 is a cherished memory. And really random side point, when we used to have the Woolworths as well. You used to sometimes get the odd newspaper and you'd get free things with it. Like I think they do it for sticker books maybe still. Like you'd get a newspaper and free sticker book, take your coupon in and they'll give you this on the day. Before this film came out, I couldn't tell you what paper it was, but I remember an advert where you got it and then you had to take the coupon to the Woolworths. And on that Sunday only, you would get given a Spider-Man 3 goodie bag.
Oh,
And,
wow.
and my parents took me. It was a comic. It was Spider-Man versus Venom. And this is what's mad. I'm not aware of trailers fully as a concept yet. I knew he had a black suit, but I didn't know who Venom was. And we'll get to that stuff properly later, but I had no idea Venom was in this film. And then I was bought the sticker book for this film. It's probably one of the last sticker books I ever got. I was 10, almost 11. I was finishing year 6, so it was my last year at primary school. And I'd done my... Was it SATs back then? Fuck knows. But I just remember this was it. This was the big thing. Spider-Man 3. And... I went to my family opening night. My older sister, she cried. I think as I've got older, I've cried a bit more. We'll get into that as well later. But she also used to fancy James Franco. And I loved it. And I'm going to give a sort of post story. I think we've had this chat before, but when I was younger, obviously the way it works, you don't know this when you're a kid. Films come out in the summer because obviously it's the best time for cinema releases, the summer blockbuster, all that. But then winter's the home release. And I think we had this chat where I was like, I remember distinctly going to Sainsbury's with my parents. It would have been, I think, September, October it came out. And I like, put it on your Christmas list. They put it in the trolley. They're like, it's going away for Christmas. You know that age that Santa's not real. Sorry, 4-year-olds. And when they took it home, I was like, I don't want this for Christmas. I want it now. So I took the film out of the wrapper, went into the lounge, put it on the DVD player, and during the opening credits, my parents barged in. I mean, let's be honest, everyone can tell what film it is based on those
Hmm.
opening credits. So, and like this is for Christmas, and they took the disc out, put it away, and on Christmas Day, I got an already opened copy of Spider-Man 3. That DVD is in the garage in the drawer with the last few DVDs I decided to keep. A conscious decision that the trilogy, I think the only DVDs I've got left, as in that I have bought since, is sentimental ones: Harry Potter films, Star Wars films, Spider-Man films, and a couple of other really random ones. So
Hmm.
it's lived long in the memories, and yeah, as we said, the meme generation has grown up. I don't know if we count as the meme generation. Like, I know there's only a couple of years between, but because I liked this and the prequels as a kid, and because I'm a bit too much into memes, I've never really discovered it via memes. I've kind of always been discovering it like, holy shit, like this is a great meme. And that's why I approach a lot of films now. But I didn't realize how insane this film is until I got older. So I read more comics, you learn more things, and
Hmm.
you're like, wow, like Avi Arad really fucked up these sets of films, didn't he? And it's not the first time. He did it
No,
the
no.
next time, the time after that, and kind of still now. And he's still in his job. That's maybe a discussion rent for another time, but yeah, any fault with this film, as far as I'm concerned, is Avi Arad, right? I think
Hmm.
he is the reason this film is the way this film is. You
Yeah.
want to talk one about Raimi leaving. They were going ahead with Spider-Man 4 until they had Amazing Spider-Man being worked on behind the scenes. Um, a colossal mess for what came after. But there
Yeah.
was one man who has got away. And it reminds me of, whenever I watch Spider-Man 3 and it's like, my Uncle Killer's still out there. That's how I always think about when Avi Arad's like still working on films after doing what he did.
It's still out there. He's still making Spider-Man films. Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if we want to kind of talk about what could have led on to Spider-Man 4. Maybe we'll save that for the end. But
Yeah.
it's watching this film again, especially when it hits that ending, knowing that we were going to get a Spider-Man 4. A release date was set. I think it was May 3rd or
2011.
May 6th, 2011. Yeah, something like that. It was all good to go. I think the villains were cast. I mean, there were some
Yeah.
questionable things that came out about it, about the Vulturous,
The
who was going to be a
Vulturous.
side.
Yeah.
Like there was that Black Cat. I think there was a whole bunch of other stuff, but I do wonder if Avi Arad would have taken a back seat more with Spider-Man 4 based on the reviews with this and the negative criticism about Venom and too many villains, and if Raimi would have got more of his sort of like original vision going into a Spider-Man 4, because he certainly didn't get it for this one. And it's so frustrating, because it's 1 and 2 were fantastic. Everyone loved them. And you think that, right, we're already onto a winning formula here, letting the filmmaker make the film he wants to make, let him just do a third one. But, if something starts making more money, lucrative thing. And I think Avi Arad said something about that Raimi was only putting villains in that Raimi enjoyed, that Raimi was a fan of. And he wasn't, it feels very sort of like focus grouping. It's like we've been analyzing what the young kids of today like and which villains they like. And Venom's selling very well right now. Venom in comic books is selling very well, very popular with a teenage demographic. Get Venom in there. And I literally think that was the only reason that Venom was put in there. Um, We'll get into it as we go through as well. Another thing on the memories as well, which kind of sums up the film for me in general, was there was a PS2 game that was released for it as well. I think it was probably released on other consoles as well. I remember buying that from HMV on day one. I think I paid £30 for it, which was usually the going rate for a new game. How I miss those days. I mean, games are like, what, 50, 55, £60 now? That's
Plus
inflation.
DLC.
Yes, yeah, that wasn't back in the day, was it? DLC good on PS2. You'd unlock things within game and you wouldn't have to pay an extra dime. But I remember playing it a little bit and it didn't feel as good as Spider-Man 2. And that's kind of where I left it. I don't think I ever played much of the Spider-Man 3 game. It was a horrible habit for me. I used to buy PS2 games. I'd either get stuck or I'd just kind of go off them and I wouldn't go back to them. And I'd feel like I'd wasted a whole lot of money at the time. But yeah, the Spider-Man 2 game is one that I would go back to all the time and would even go back to even after Spider-Man 3, the game came out. That's just a bit of an aside. But yeah, the memes for this is just amazing. And we are living in the meme generation and I'm here for it. And it's been nice to see some of the Spider-Man memes come back. they never really went away, in all honesty, but especially with this new film coming out, with all of the familiar faces coming back, and this is just from trailers. We have had like it's prime real estate at the moment from Spider-Man memes, and it's interesting. You know, you take yourself back to the first time that you go and see this film. You don't even know what a meme is at that point. I don't even think memes existed, or if they did,
No,
it was in like the actually no, I
the
actually don't think
dark
they
web probably
existed.
back then.
Yeah, probably back then, you know, like 2007. I think that was it was the age of fan trailers, I remember. You know, probably after this as well, like when Spider-Man 4 was announced, like someone would cobble together footage from all different Tobey Maguire films or whatever it is, and it's like official Spider-Man 4 teaser trailer. You know, it was the humble days of the internet, but especially in recent years, you know, with the prequel memes and everything going into this one, I definitely think that's added to my enjoyment of this film. And I always did enjoy it. I always did have a soft spot in my heart for it, but pretty much every sentence when I was rewatching this film today for this review, every single line, every single moment was getting a laugh out of me. And I think if these were put in the cinema now, I think you would have that crowd. And I think it would be our generation, it would be our age group. Um, so yeah, I hope memes continue for things. It's so weird. You can't put like a trend on it. You can't say that this is going to become a meme. I think it is only select things that work for memes as well, like especially that go on for a long time as well. Like the prequels are always going to be meme worthy. Every single Star Wars thing that comes out, and I genuinely think that these Spider-Man films have hit those levels. Maybe not to the same degree, but with that fan base is always there, and I think, you know, people our age group are always going to be nostalgic for this film, which is why I hope in less than a month's time it pays off for us at that new film.
Yeah, and I think when you really go back to this film as well, there's a lot of not science behind it, sort of it's aging, but our generation were a certain age when this came out. I don't want to say the demographic audience, but maybe we were. And I think obviously with what happened after the Amazing Spider-Man 1 and 2 didn't work out for whatever reason. I mean, we all know there's reasons, but they instantly made these three look better.
Mhm.
And I think you've had, I don't want to sort of give a consensus. We'll talk about this sort of the trilogy at the end and stuff, but I think as every year's gone by and you get more and more and more comic book films, I don't want to sound like a sort of old man yells at cloud. I appreciate we're going to get 4 a year, 5 TV shows a year, whatever. But back in the day of one every year or two, and it wasn't the same character,
Mhm.
it became an event to see these characters on screen. And I don't think people of today's generation know how lucky it was and how important it was that those films were successful because the guy that exec produced this film, I don't know, actually did Kevin Feige work on Spider-Man 3? I didn't check that credit. I know he did 1 and
Let me
2.
double check real
He may
quick.
have been busy making Iron Man actually, so don't quote me to that one. But with this one, I think as the years have gone by, our age group has grown up, and again, these films have looked better just because time is proving these right. And even though there are massive issues with this film, I do think meme culture is great for, I don't want to say for cinema, but just as a conversation piece and like not even making people, but there are some films I've discovered not from being a meme, but through like a quote. And I think quotes of no one really does film quotes anymore. Back in the day, it was always film quotes. And what character this quote? You'd watch a film because you saw this quote, this character's. Now it's memes. People will look at memes, what's popular, what's causing something. It's like Squid Game, right? One
Mhm.
of the reasons Squid Game's become sensational, I've not seen it yet, is
Same.
because of the memes that came out from it. Because everyone was not just talking about the show, they were making memes of the show. And I think meme culture has honestly transpired a whole new wave of TV. Whether that's good or bad is certainly a conversation within itself. But it makes films live on. And who talks about X-Men 3: The Last Stand? No one. Does it have
Mhm.
any good memes? No. This film has great memes, and people know that. And there are people that dislike Tobey Maguire because they're upset the fact that he's a meme and that he has fans through that sort of thing. And it's such a fucking weird dystopian thing. And just as a side message to the any potential people ready to dislike the press the dislike button, A, we can't see anymore, so we don't care. But B, each of the two Spider-Men that followed him have come out and said this guy's the goat. He's the original. He is the best of them all. And I think we've spoken about this off screen. There's this famous photo of Tom Holland at the age of about 4 or 5 doing the rounds with the Spider-Man toy of Tobey Maguire. And you do realize that it's mad that the current Spider-Man was watching this Spider-Man as a kid at the cinema. And obviously, I guess I don't know. We also had this chat about one of about off air, but the only of the modern day characters that I not even I can compare to that, but Batman and Spider-Man to me are in this realm of James Bond now, where I've accepted that they are never not going to be in production. There will always now be Spider-Man films and Batman films in production.
Mhm.
Maybe it's simultaneously. Who knows? We'll be getting it next year. And I think the only other thing that ever had that was Bond. And going back to our Bond reviews from earlier this year, we had a great discussion. Couldn't tell you which one. Where we spoke about like Bond's importance on pop culture. It was like the
Yeah.
original. He was the original superhero before superhero films. And you got to think when all these comics were getting made in the 60s and 70s, Bond was already around at that point, which is a very interesting dynamic, and it's really interesting seeing that sort of history thing. But just off a side tangent, the Spider-Man 3 reaction is insanity. But I'm glad. I think a lot more people are nicer, and those that were harsh on it, I think have seen a lot of shit films recently, because
Mhm.
even people I know that like mock these films, they all love them deep down. They just like to throw sticks and stones at it, but you'll never break Tobey Maguire's bones, so it's all good.
Well, let's talk about the man himself. I think that's a good segue as any to talk about Toby and the symbiote. So, I know from like the initial ideas that Raimi was coming up and like what angle he wanted to take this one. He wanted to delve into the concept of humanity with criminals, which obviously is like the whole Sandman thing, that he's done all these unspeakable things, but there is, he does have a heart of gold, really, and he's got a lot of underlying things there, and he wanted that to be the central theme to it, and that's probably more of a topic on when we get to the Sandman in just a second, and the retconning of the whole Uncle Ben thing, which I have mixed feelings on. But Toby himself in this, I think, talking about the memes, this is probably the most popular for all the memes, I would say, with some of the stuff that happens within this film. I think he still turns in a solid performance. He's as good as the material that he's given. There are some very questionable things in this film for me when it comes to this. I think dealing with the whole black suit thing, it's a million and one cooks in the kitchen. We've talked about that. That is the underlying issue of this film. Um, that is the part that's mishandled for me when it comes to
Yeah,
Tobey Maguire, and I don't blame him. Like, he can do dramatic performances. He can do very good dramatic performances, and has done in the Spider-Man films before. But I think if you're introducing the black suit and the symbiote, there needs to be a big switch with Peter. And there's always this. I mean, there's always been an underlying element of camp to all of these Spider-Man films.
yeah,
I'm not going to say it started with this one. They've been in all of them. But I think with some of the elements in this film, it went a step too far. The dancing down the street, which is great. And, everything I'm talking about now, they are probably, problems within the film, but I love all of these. Like, I don't hate this film. I've reached acceptance with every single criticism that I'm going to, give into this film. The dancing down the street, I remember people kind of like face palming, myself included, in the cinema. I was like, what the hell is happening? Why is this in the film? What are they doing? He's like dancing down the street to a James Brown song. It's all the scenes that everyone talks about. The jazz club scene. Now dig on this. That whole thing. I was like, this shouldn't be in this film. They should be going for like a dark, dramatic, huge juxtaposition. But it doesn't feel like that. It still feels very kid friendly, very on the nose, very campy, which is Sam Raimi's shtick. The raindrops keep falling on my head montage from Spider-Man 2. That's pure camp, but it works for that film. And I feel like they were trying to do that similar effect with this film with some of the montages, and it just kind of fell flat to me. So much of this film with Tobey Maguire's character and Peter Parker is that, the divide, him becoming evil. But I never really get that sense because they do pepper it in with so much humor. I feel like this one needed to go like full on Nolan. This needed to be brooding,
yeah,
shocking, everything like that. And it tries to have elements in there where where he smacks Mary Jane. That is a shocking scene. But then you think to like 30 seconds before that, where he's having this like elaborate dance routine with Mary Jane. He's shredding on the piano. He's like double time, and he's like dancing to a jazz number. It doesn't fit for me. And that's probably where my biggest problem comes with the Tobey Maguire stuff. That being said, like at the end, we'll talk about Harry in a second. Those elements of the story, I think they actually tied up very well. There's some shaky starting ground with it, and there are some problems with the Harry storyline, which I feel like they didn't really know what to do with it, so they kind of shelve it for a while. But when it
yeah.
cycles back to the end and you hit on those core character moments and the things that matter in this trilogy is these relationships between these characters, I do think it comes together at the end. So it's a mixed bag for me with Toby, but I don't blame Toby. It's the screenwriting, it's the direction they wanted to take it.
I think the modern day time. I mean, we've just had to witness Jared Leto and Gucci, but the saying they will use is they quote understand the assignment. Have you seen that being used a lot recently? And
Oh, I
it's
haven't
like
seen that, I
for
don't think,
people
no.
that it's used for people that are zany, that know this film is insane or anything. It's like
Right.
they understand the assignment. They got what the film was doing, and I'm not making excuses. And I've had this in my head for many years. I don't know if you said in the last review, but we know Sam Raimi didn't want to do Venom. We know Sam Raimi didn't want to do the symbiote, and we know he wanted to do Sandman, and he wanted to do Harry Osborn as the new
Mhm.
Green Goblin. I have this in my head, 100%. He had no intention of ever doing it, and I think that is why it is not just shoehorned in, not why it's at 100 miles an hour. It is done to look stupid, and
Right.
that's a very petty thing for me to say, and people might think I sound like an idiot, but this is the guy that gave us Spider-Man 1 and 2, that understood the concepts of the character, what the character was going through, the journey, man, all that really good stuff. And we get dancing in the street, clicking the fingers, and as every year's gone by, I've just kind of thought, like, was this Sam Raimi, like just fucked it?
Sabotaging the film a little bit,
Yeah,
self-sabotage a little bit.
yeah, and like we'll get into Topher Grace later, but for again a trilogy that's nailed casting. I'm even talking Sandman,
Oh, yeah.
nailed
Yeah.
casting, and then we get Topher Grace, who I love. Topher Grace, I like that '70s show. I liked him in a Black Klansman as much as I guess you can like someone like that, but an actor I think is very underrated, and you throw him into this, which he was never, ever, ever should be anywhere near. And again, it's like, how did Sam Raimi do that when, again, you look at his track record in the films before this, and it's fascinating because obviously at the time you wouldn't know, but when you realize, I think Amazing Spider-Man 2 is something similar, how awful Sony and Avi Arad are at the power they have, and part of me just thinks I don't think Sam Raimi could have intentionally gone out where they thought, I want to tell this great story about the black suited Spider-Man and the damage of the symbol, because you still get good scenes within it, like the
Mhm.
church scene and all that. And it has moments, but there's
I
just
needed
a
more
lot
of
of
that. That's
nonsense.
the kind of stuff I
Yeah,
needed
and
more of. It needed to be that tone
and
for
and
that to
this
work for me.
and this is it. And how many, to Toby's credit, how many actors would actually say, "I'm just not doing that"? Like, imagine Harrison Ford being told, "Harrison, just dance on that step. Give us a bit of spin, wear a black suit, put a smile liner on." It was that Fallout Boy era, right? With the black
Mhm.
eyeliner and the emo fringe and everything. And it's just amazing that this is the outcome we have from the film. I just think there's more to it. I think there's so much behind the scenes stuff that we'll just never understand, and it'll never get brought to the light of day. I mean, it's only as simple as knowing who the villains were for Spider-Man 4 were going to be, why they didn't go ahead, and then why those villains were then used in the reboot anyway. So yeah, it's really interesting because I don't think Tobey Maguire is bad in this film. I think when he's got the drama stuff to do, he's very good. But when he's got this ridiculous dancing down the street stuff, he's good at doing it, and that's why he's memeable. Even going back to the first two, when there are meme moments, he can do it. Holding onto the train, the face, the moments like that. I think he's. I don't want to say a very underrated actor, but I don't think he gets a lot of credit for what he does, because I think now he's got the modern day rep as the poker player, the legend, the meme, and all this kind of stuff. I think really, I think he's quite massively underrated, and I think again it took the franchise to lose him. And this isn't a slight on Andrew Garfield or Tom Holland. In truth, I think for the franchise to lose him and what he was to that character, and only a discussion of what potentially might come onto the screens on December the 15th. Sorry, I think goes to show the power he had, and to drop a film this quote unquote bad and him still be craved back to the masses. And I only think just look at other franchises. One obvious glaring one of Rise of Skywalker. You've got let's take Oscar Isaac, right? Who's a phenomenal actor, probably better than he's a better than Tobey Maguire. We've seen him before these films. He's a big name. In these films, unused, but gets some moments, and then he gets the third one, and he's just reading the pain with the
Mhm.
somehow the Emperor's Return. But if they says Oscar Isaac's going to come back as Poe, be like, oh, do we need him back? I love
Mhm.
Oscar Isaac. Whereas do we need Tobey back? Yes, we do,
Mhm.
because he was done badly, and that's a different conversation. But not many actors, I don't think, can. Not even an actor, not many films and many productions can get such a clanger where they came out tomorrow. It's like he's going to get his due time now.
Mhm.
And I think Toby is in that. I think he handles, and I think like a lot of the actors in this film, I think they all do the best they can get with what they're given because they're not given an awful lot at all.
Well, that's fundamentally it. You know, it is the direction, but it does feel like it's at odds with itself. You mentioned the church scene. That's probably my favorite single shot in that whole thing. It's almost like Tim Burton took over from that. You know, church top, moody, on a
Yeah,
gargoyle, raining, nighttime. You know, it's so good, and there are other good moments as well. I know that we're talking about the symbiote. This kind of stretches into Venom, which I know we're saving later. So there's a lot of characters in this film. There's too many characters in this film fundamentally, but you know, stuff that Raimi does with the camera with the symbiote itself, the way it looks, the way it crawls, and the effects on it. There's like a POV shot, which is almost like Evil Dead as well. I know we go back to that a lot. I know that's the only thing that I kind of lean on because it is the only other Sam Raimi thing that I've ever watched. But there are some good horror elements in there as well. Stuff that you get towards the end of the church, at the end when it's possessing Topher Grace and everything. Um, the kind of brooding look of the suit, the way that the suit looks itself, the black suit with the music as
yeah.
well. We'll talk about the music later on. That's all really good stuff. And I do wonder if they'd have stuck to that tone, would people have been more okay with it, or would they have still said that it's too many villains in there? I don't know, but we'll get onto villains in just a second. There are some funny Toby things in there though. Even at the time, I remember laughing at there way before meme generation. The bit where he fights Harry at the beginning, there are some expressions during that fight
Yeah.
which are just some extreme close-ups, which oh my god, I don't even know how they made it into the edit, but it's brilliant.
It's
Everyone like rags on his crying face as well. I think that's probably been in there since Spider-Man 1 with the whole Uncle Ben thing. His best friend dies in this film. You're telling me you wouldn't
yeah,
cry? Like, it's
he
fine. He
sacrificed
sells it.
himself.
Yeah.
He sacrificed himself as a redemption arc as well, and it's teased up at the start of the film as well
Mhm.
when he says, I'd die for him, and the fight at the start, though, like I think it's the James. I think we reached the James Franco discovered weed era at this point in time, right?
Oh god, yeah.
The
Yeah,
You've got like
absolutely.
Spider-Man 2, like I mean, I'm not saying he wasn't high, but in this film, it is notably more obvious than,
Mhm.
well, I say more than any film. Obviously, just look at every film that came out he did after. Um, but this is the point where was he in it? He goes, "This is ridiculous," and we'll get into character shortly, but you got to think like, look at how much of this plot took up by Venom, the whole black suit, all of that. This would have probably been a film of just the Sandman and Green Goblin, and I think that could have been balanced perfectly.
Mhm.
I think things would have changed, been done differently. But it wouldn't have gone at 200 because that fight is like what in the opening 10 minutes? Is that the first Spider-Man scene we get? And he's not even
Yeah.
really as Spider-Man. And it's just insane to think about what comes. But even the random things like the wall being pulled out of like that
It's
the
like, "Shut
entire like wall.
up!" Yeah, that bit.
Yeah, and it just goes so quick, and there's a lot of bonkers things in that scene. Some great things, some memes, some Easter eggs, all that kind of stuff. But I just think I think they're doing the best of what they got, and it's such a
Mhm.
shame because that's all they were allowed to do.
Well, Raimi did, we may as well talk about Harry first because we've got onto him
Yeah,
now. Raimi did say that he wanted this film to close the whole Harry Osborn story arc, so I'm assuming him dying at the end was always going to be part of the plan. And you know, when it does find its footing, as I mentioned at the end, it nails it, it sells it. I never liked the costume of the new
yeah,
Goblin. I
yeah,
think that he should have, because you know you get that great scene in the Green Goblin lair at the beginning, which I know that we keep talking about. We want some replicas to be sold from these films, and hopefully with the popularity of the new one, there's a bit of nostalgia, there's a bit of an outcry for stuff like that. You've got like the original green mask, you've got a silver mask, which I don't know why he made a silver one. Maybe he hadn't spray painted at the point. And then there's like the hockey mask, and that's the kind of aesthetic they go for. The surfboard, the hockey mask, and I don't know. I never liked it. Would be fine with the new board if they did want to do that. You know, it feels. I don't know if he ever says in the films that he's into snowboarding or whatnot. I'd have been fine with the board, but I think if he'd have wore the original mask, I think that would have been a really haunting image of seeing that
exactly.
defining mask again, and like Peter going, "Oh my god, he's back!" Like, who the hell is this kind of thing? I think that would have been really cool. I don't know if I'm guessing Harry made that as a custom mask because I don't see Norman Osborn going, you know what, I'm going to make a hockey mask, you know, like a ski mask.
In
I'm going to
this
wear that.
film, we've seen the trailer. We've got to
Oh, that's
those
true.
that don't
Yeah,
know at
yeah.
home.
I
What
guess
worth
I need
bringing
to
up?
take it all back. Yeah.
I mean,
But the yeah, go on. Sorry.
I was just going to say for anyone at home that's seen that new trailer, I just want to clarify it's not James Franco. Some people thought it was. It's not. I don't know. I can endorse this on the channel, but if you want to Want to see what the costume is? You can find it on Reddit and
Hmm.
everywhere else, but it
Yeah,
is not James Franco. It is Willem Dafoe. Different
absolutely.
conversation, but yeah,
But with the Harry stuff as well, there are some good moments, but again, a lot of problems with this. I've always hated, didn't like it at the time, still don't like it now. The whole amnesia storyline, awful. It felt like you'd had so much of a great build up from the end of Spider-Man, well, even Spider-Man 1 into 2, especially with the ending of 2. Going into this one, you get that opening action scene, which, yeah, it is quite corny in some bits, but then it's like, we don't know what to do with Harry now, and we've got to get to Sandman, and we've got to get to Venom, and we've got all these other things. What do we do? And they didn't know what to do with him, so they do a really cliched memory wipe thing. And I always thought when I watched the film, has he actually lost his mind? Does he have amnesia, or is he letting on more than it? Does he still know who he is? Because there's some like knowing glances, and when he's in the hospital bed and he's kind of grinning at him, and it's kind of menacing. I thought, oh, does he still? He still knows what's up. He still knows that that's Peter Parker and Spider Man, whatnot. But no, he genuinely has amnesia. I always thought the bit where he gets clotheslined is hilarious. I think it's the
yeah.
sound effect they use. It's like doing when he like hits the web. It feels very cartoony. Um,
It's
yeah, go on.
you
Sorry.
hit a pipe as well. You get like a dang noise as well,
Yes,
and
he's like a pinball. He bounces off everything. He bounces off a wall, a pipe, you name it, he hits it. And then the rest of the film with the Harry stuff, it's like this really bad CW love triangle shit that they kind of throw in. And it feels so played out. As I said, like CW, it doesn't feel like good writing half the time. I'm like, why are we concerning ourselves with this love triangle, which I guess becomes a love square when you throw Gwen Stacy into the mix as well, in some respects. So it feels like so much of the film is mired in that pointless drama. And I don't know if that was originally the intention. I don't know if Raimi had to do that because he was juggling everything else and he couldn't make it work in the script. But I have to believe that if it was just Harry and Sandman, we would have got a lot more Harry versus Spider-Man throughout the film rather than just that at the beginning.
yeah, and this is what's kind of annoying me as I've got older, that you think that moment of Harry being masked. I mean, it's one thing not to give him the actual goblin costume, but you mentioned a haunting image. I've always like imagined like how would that have been for Spider-Man to see the Green Goblin flying around? It's the same glider, it's the same mask, it's the same weapons, and he might think it's Harry, he might not think it's Harry, but I think it was always a missed opportunity. And again, this comes down to Venom, Symbiote, Avi Arad. I think if Sam Raimi would, I mean, you just look at the development of Doctor Octopus in that last film. Look at what they do with. I know the first Green Goblin's a bit hammy and whatnot, but Willem Dafoe knows what's going on.
Hmm.
And I just think there that the Green Goblin's unveiled to Tobey Maguire like 40 seconds into the first time they meet as a villain couple.
Mm.
And I'm just kind of sat there saying that, how great a film could it be if that was like the halfway point or the end of Act Two? I know it's a bit similar to the first one, I guess, but if he is aware who the Goblin actually is after all. And I just think it's lost because you can tell he wants to, and I think this is a character that it's not like it's been done on the spot. As you said, he the seeds were planted in Spider-Man 1. The story continued to Spider-Man 2, left at a clear tipping point of he is going to become the Green Goblin. And you're right, it's hockey mask, and he's got a snowboarding thing, which I always find really weird. How do the pumpkin bombs fit in a snowboard? They're quite big.
That's a good point.
Things like that,
I never
always
even thought of that. Yeah.
yeah,
He's
and
got a sword in this one as well. That's a new addition. I don't
swords.
remember. Yeah,
Why is the sword green? Why has he
I
got
know.
green sparks? It's questions I've always
Yeah.
asked myself, and I just think if you look at where it goes wrong, a lot of people moan about films that balance three villains, and it really aggravates me because good films can balance three villains. Look at Batman Begins that came out 2 years before. You've got Falcone, you've got Scarecrow, you've got
Mm.
Ra's al Ghul, and an origin story. There are a lot of films that can balance three villains. It's about how they're written and which one you choose to focus on. I think Sandman is absolutely fine as a secondary villain. Had he have been the secondary villain and not the third choice villain or whatever they want to ultimately call it, and there's a lot missing with this, and I think a lot of it is down to how awful the Harry. I mean, the amnesia thing. I think if I hadn't been 10, if I'd have been the age I'm now, I'd probably have hated Spider-Man 3 at the time. Like, I understand people that do. I will give it this cheap dig, but still one I'm always going to do. at least it wasn't one of Iron Man's villains, and his beef is with Iron Man. And I will
Yeah.
always quote
Yeah.
that because as someone that loves these films and these characters, I'm just sick to death of characters that have no beef with Spider-Man that just end up becoming Spider-Man villains.
Mhm.
That's not how it should be. And at least in the new film, we're getting Spider-Man villains because they've already been Spider-Man villains in different multiverses.
Mhm.
But no, it's the Harry stuff. I think that's is that the. I mean, really, if you look at the opening scenes, the meme of him looking over on the balcony,
I
like
know. Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not a bad setup for the first time you see him, like him just staring at Peter. And it did make me think. I did tweet it last night. I think I took a photo of. Well, I didn't take a photo. It is the meme. I just bet me watching Avi Arad churn out shit Venom films time and time again because it's it's a great meme. And yeah, I think the film's loss is starting into Harry. But that being said, he has a satisfying character arc. And going back to what we said that that Sam Raimi had this idea for Harry Osborn, I think Harry was always dying, and I think he was always dying uh, to save Peter to
Yeah.
whatever extent the villain could have been, would have been, and I think it was always going to end the way it did. I just think it's how they got to the end point and they missed. Because the moment the pumpkin bomb comes back in and you get their 2-on-1 fight,
Mhm.
that's something I could have seen if just Sandman was the villain as well, no Venom. And it's things like that that annoy me because he's got the ending right. He's just been messed over, and I think he's just had to go at 100 miles an hour.
Yeah, so if we talk about that fight scene between the two of them at the end, because I do think that's where it pulls it back. Certainly, like the end, like how that fight ends with the bomb going off in his face, that was shocking. I remember that being so everyone gasped in the cinema when that happened. Even more so when you get the face reveal and it's completely burnt the side of his face. He's got like the dead eye and everything. That out of the whole film, just jump into the music really quickly. The fight scene is my least favorite part where it's scored. It's this really bizarre kind of jazz beat to it when they first start
Yeah,
fist fighting, and I've never understood it. It just doesn't fit that scene in any way, shape, or form. So that kind of does lessen the impact of the fight scene. Like if the Goblin theme had kicked in there, or like the da 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 da, or something like that, when they're
yeah.
fighting. But it's this weird kind of beat to it. But the end of that fight, the him
The
deciding
silence
to
as
go
well
and
with the grenades. The silence of the
yeah,
grenades is a big thing as well.
I mean, good job it wasn't the one that turns you into a skeleton, right? I mean, that would have been a very different ending. You would have had no Harry Osborn swooping in at the last second to save Peter Parker then. And then talking about that scene briefly, I know it's probably going to be one of your favorite scenes. It's one of mine. Him returning the tag team kind of fighting with him and Harry and the choreography of that, and obviously the sacrifice at the end and the emotional farewell. That is the part where it absolutely nails, and of course, that is the completion of that character arc, that story arc, the relationship between these two friends, and that works. That's the stuff that works. So it's a very shaky road getting to that point, but it does stick the landing, and it is a very emotional farewell to the thing, to the ending, which I cried at back then in 2007. And watching it today, I was getting misty. That music kicks in, that beautiful sunset shot. Oh, I think it's acted perfectly, and I won't hear a negative thing said about Tobey Maguire's crying face because I think he nailed that part. But we need to talk about the third person in this triangle that's going on. We need to talk about Mary Jane. So obviously Kirsten Dunst. I can't stand her in this film. I find her absolutely intolerable. I find her thoroughly unlikable. She just seems like really moody and miserable and angry and mean spirited in this film, and she's just kind of irritating to listen to in this film. And also, like you talked about, I don't know if you mentioned it, like James Franco felt like he was tuning out a little bit, or maybe he thought this stuff was ridiculous with the whole, discovering weed or whatever. But Kirsten Dunst seems so checked out of this film.
Yeah.
And I thought that then, and especially watching it today, it became very evident. It doesn't seem like she's given it her all, which seems like a mean thing to say because I'm sure she was, but I don't know if that's like the meanness of the character, but that also kind of translated into my understanding of Kirsten Dunst not giving a shit about this material anymore. And especially, I've mentioned this every week, and it kind of culminates with this one. There's a hostage situation going on. The mysterious Venom creature has a hostage, and it's Mary Jane in a taxi cab, and she's screaming and fighting for her life. And I thought, we're doing this again. It felt like they didn't know what to do with Mary Jane's character. There's the whole beef with her on Broadway, and the whole Spider-Man thing, the very ending shot of Spider-Man 2 where she sees him swing away, and it's like this could lead to some problems. Those come up in the film, but then you've got all the Broadway stuff which is just ridiculous and just I'm not interested in it. And then there's the love triangle stuff where she's going with Harry and she's having a hard time with Peter, and it feels like familiar territory. And by the time it
Yeah,
gets to the end, she's in another hostage situation. I don't care. It feels so repetitive by that point. So yeah, it's a shame because I know that the relationship angle is a huge thing with the Spider-Man character, but I just cannot stand Kirsten Dunst in this film, and I don't blame her. I think it's just the material she had to work with again.
that's the same. I think it's a bad script at that, and I we I guess it's a really good point actually. The least we know about what would have changed is probably her act because we know in the last film she's got the acting gigs and the Broadway thing kind of makes sense, and her going to put on that she's failing at her job and Pete has the arrogance of Spider-Man. That could work as a key theme throughout the film. But it's when it's Harry, you're going to do something for me now. You're going to break up with him, and then you're going to get kidnapped by Venom, and then you're going to be the hostage again. And I just kind of not doing the whole like snaggy logistics thing, but is that sort of oh look, people of the world, this evil supervillain has kidnapped her. That's the third one in a row. I wonder what the link is between all of these people being kidnapped and her and being villains. And and it's a really stupid thing to say, but it just feels a bit. I think it just degrades the character because, like I said, we know how good an actress she is, and she's probably going to get an Oscar nomination this year for Power of the Dog. And you forget how young she was doing the Spider-Man films
Mhm.
as well. And that's something I didn't realize the last year or two is how young she was. I think she was maybe 25 when she did this one. I don't know, but
Oh wow.
um, yeah, like she's a lot younger than you think, and I think she's not got the material, the script's not in it, and I'd imagine her contract probably has her as second build. Would you say maybe
Mhm. Yeah,
probably a
yeah,
second
it
build
is. Yeah.
after him, and I just think they miss out again, and it's really awkward. The whole like oh well, she sings terribly, and it's like she got sacked and then just disappears, and the whole engage. I mean that even brings Gwen Stacy into it, right? Another casualty of these films is I mean, Bryce Dallas Howard I absolutely love in real life, but
Mhm.
Amazing Spider-Man did it better. We're not going to say it many times for anything in these films, but why would you bring in a character that significant and important to be used as a love square? Because I mean, I'm not saying you want to sort of bring her into it in a future film, absolutely not. But at the same time, it's just kind of like here's just bringing a love triangle, but we can just add in a name people have heard of that
Yeah.
means something to
Yeah.
Spider-Man fans, and it both discredits the character and not just like source material, but it just discredits everyone on screen. And that's also not on Bryce Dallas Howard at all. I think she's also doing well with what she can. That
Mhm.
Gwen Stacy is now a supermodel,
Yeah.
apparently, whilst
Oh
being at
god.
uni.
Was it? I've got
Um,
a secret. It's my photocopier. Oh, yeah. What?
yeah, it's
And
it's
I
bad.
don't blame Raimi for that. I think that was studio shit as well.
No,
I
I think
think there
so.
was like, we want another love interest in this film, and as you mentioned, Gwen Stacy, popular name in the comics. It's a character people know in the Spider-Man mythology. Get her in the film, and completely pointless, absolutely wasted in the film. She doesn't. There's not even a shred of anything about a character that remotely resembles Gwen Stacy, apart from the blonde hair. But in terms of a personality, and
Yeah.
Gwen Stacy, for better or worse, is known for the one scene that she's
Dying.
memorable for is dying, and
Yeah,
you've already kind of hinted at that scene in the first Spider-Man film. You did it with Mary Jane instead, and you can't do that again with this film. And if you're not going to do the death of Gwen Stacy or pursue a relationship with Gwen Stacy long term in the trilogy, then don't bother, don't bring her into it. And I think she's just completely wasted. Easily one of the weakest things in this film. And again, it's not Bryce Dallas Howard's fault because she's done some great stuff. She really has. Um, but yeah, I remember the opening of this film being weird as well, and something not bad, but something kind of not feeling right immediately when this film starts off. Because if you look at the other ones, you open with some kind of action or something taking place, something high energy. The first film, it was him chasing after the school bus, I think it was, and it's kind of exciting, and we're getting to know Peter Parker. The second one was he's got a time limit, he's got to deliver these pizzas. It
yeah.
might be small scale, but it's something, it's energetic, and this one, we get this bizarre kind of voiceover, kind of, I'm loving life. I've done all this stuff. And then it goes to, it's wonderful. And he's sitting in an auditorium. And I don't know. There was something about the opening that didn't quite feel right to me. It didn't feel like a Spider Man opening. It felt like, oh, this feels, I can't quite put my finger on it. It didn't kind of have that staying power. As soon as it started off, I thought, this feels a little bit clunky. It feels a little bit awkward. I don't know if you ever had that or if that was just me.
it's a weird one. I get the concept that he's now in love. He's got the girlfriend. He's got lots of good stuff going for him, but it feels too upbeat. Maybe the
Yeah, that's
whole
I think it might be.
the whole key for the city stuff. I know that's not the opening scene, but you could have done the opening scene halfway through the film. Like, oh look, they love me now, because they do that anyway.
Mhm.
I just, yeah, it's almost like it's too obvious that everything's going so well. Oh no, Harry Osborn's gonna pop up, and then I always sit there thinking, saying, well, what's the time gap between the two? I know he says is it 2 years or a year and a half or
I
something
think it's
between?
1 year. I thought it was according to Wikipedia, it's 1 year between the 2, but
That's
I
fine
thought it was a few more years.
because I always laugh like, oh yeah, Harry just patiently waited to get that serum, and he
He's
was
gotta
going to
get
attack him the
his
same night.
surfboard skills up, right? 'Cause had he done
Yeah,
surfboarding before on a
he flies
glider or
that pretty
whatnot?
well. You know,
Yeah.
it's got an auto tracking feature. I'd buy it. Probably Elon Musk is probably wasting billions of dollars making one of those as we speak or something. But it's one of those things that it just starts too quick and it goes at 100 miles an hour. You could have opened up so many different things, and it just doesn't. And I think that's where you can look at the key problems. It goes all the way back, and I think it goes back to them saying, "Let's have Harry versus Spider-Man." 10 minutes in, the engagement as well, like just looking in a shop window for an engagement ring.
Mhm.
Just quickly visit Aunt May. Okay, fight on the way home. And I don't think that's how the other Spider-Man films have been done. The pacing's off; it's too quick.
Yeah.
And we spoke in both our reviews saying that how great is that it's 2 hours long. It flies by. I will give this film this. The pacing does fly by, and I don't think it feels longer than what it is. But because they're trying to do so much, you're missing out. And we're
It's
not in the
spread too thin,
2020.
isn't it? It's like what
Yeah,
Bilbo says, it's like butter scraped over too much bread. It's just there's no real meat to it because it's trying to do so many things where if it focused in, narrowed down, then you could have had something truly satisfying, I think.
and I think back then you're not going to get a 3 hour comic book film. I mean,
No.
this year we're spoilt for choice. We've had what House of Gucci, Eternals, Bond,
Dune.
Spider Man, Dune. We're getting a lot of very long films this year, and you can't do that in only seven. But this is the difference now, right? Here we are, 14 years later, and they can juggle three Spider-Man brackets apparently. Brackets, close brackets, like what, six villains we're going to probably get,
Mhm.
a multiverse, a story about someone escaping the law that's from the last film. And I think 2 hours 30, 40. Okay, that's going to help. But you can't do that in '07 for Spider Man.
Mhm.
And again, this all comes down to Sony. So, you know what? The symbol is just, it's going to add too much to this film. It's not going to work. We've already got to try and develop Sandman. We've got to try and develop Harry. But no, let's just add in a new entity. And we spoke about it last week, didn't we? Spider Man 2. We
Mhm.
wanted to, and this is what I think of Raimi. I know he didn't like the character of Venom, but I remember the opening weekend when this film came out. I can't give you box office numbers, but if you remember the legend that is Lizo on Newsround, who's had a very good career, I remember distinctly watching it on a Monday and they announced the Spider Man 4, 5, and 6. There were
Yeah.
three of them. And I just remember this had broken all these records at the time. And you know what? I mean, okay, the film's already out, the damage is done. But if their long term plan was to do another three, why would you shoehorn Venom in now? Why not? Why
Mhm.
not wait for Spider Man 4 or 5? And because technically maybe Tom Holland's doing that for Spider Man 4, who knows? But it's one of them now where they really took a missed opportunity, and as they've not learned from their mistakes because instead we've had shit Venom films, and Venom doesn't need his own film. He should never have had his own film, and it's disgraceful that they've both been financially successful, and it means we'll probably get more of them.
Well, after
But
this one, a spin-off was already in talks right after this film with Venom,
yeah, he
with,
did die. A Topher Grace-led Venom film. What?
so
What?
I don't know about that, but they were talking
The
about a Venom
logic's there.
spin-off film. Yeah, and just before we took, we're going to move on to the villains in just a second. The one thing I will say as well was sort of like the Gwen Stacy, Tobey Maguire, Kirsten Dunst stuff. The characters do a lot of things that just feel out of character for them, like specifically the upside down kiss scene, which obviously causes a lot of
Yeah,
drama in the film.
Spider-Man would
We
never
need
do
that
that.
to happen because we need to have this, huge upheaval between, Kirsten Dunst and Tobey Maguire. But I don't see Peter Parker doing that. Like, I
No.
don't see that happening. Like, why would he do that? He knows that his girlfriend is in the crowd. He knows what that kiss means to them. Like, it's just questionable things like that. When Gwen Stacy comes to the when they're both having dinner and she is acting very flirtatious, like you could say friendly, but it's just
Yeah.
like you just wouldn't do that, it's just So it's frustrating because, we've seen these characters in 2 previous films now, and it's like we know how these characters act, we know how they operate, and it just feels like they kind of skew that in this film just to have some kind of romantic drama with them, and that always kind of rubbed me up the wrong way as well, that these characters were doing this. Um, I don't know if you have anything to say on that, unless you wanna should we move on to the villains now, or?
No, let's talk about some of the villains. Uh, s- uh, let's talk Sandman because
Mhm.
we've sort of mentioned Venom a lot, but we'll give him a little bit more time. Um, Lyle from George of the Jungle.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
one of, I mean, these films haven't got a lot wrong, but the fact you can cast, I would argue, a B-list Spider-Man villain if you're going to be not, he's not the elite tier, is he? But he's
Um,
still a kind of big one, but he's not big enough. Or maybe the film didn't make him big enough because we know films have the power to do that.
mhm,
But when I mean, I laughed, but he did the whole Tobey Maguire takes the iconic shirt out of his chest of drawers and lifts it
mhm,
up for everyone to see. I think they have, you want to talk about comic book page to person.
yeah.
It's almost like he was born to play this role. And I used to really like Sandman, like the concept of the character. And you got to take your mind back to 2007. CGI is getting there to be able to try these new things like the big fist thing, all those weird shapes. You know what? The Mummy Returns, I think, had
Mm,
a lot to do with this. That's why I always thought about. I really like him. Now I know we may have differing thoughts on the Uncle Ben stuff, which I agree is very weird, but I just kind of took it for what it was.
mhm,
But I quite like the fact that he's sympathetic, not necessarily in the same way Doc Ock was, but this is more of the me looking at it from sort of how I am socially and maybe politically. Like, yeah, that's right. If they had an NHS over there, there wouldn't be Sandman. He wouldn't have had to turn to crime to help his daughter. And I think a lot of what makes Sandman great in this film is his score for
oh,
the
yeah.
dramatic
Yeah,
scenes
yeah.
and the action scenes. I think they're a really big factor in how good he is.
Yeah, absolutely. The music I've said out of the 3 Spider-Man scores, I always respect the first one with Danny Elfman because he created those themes, but this for me is the best score out of all 3, just in terms of hitting those emotional beats for me. And yeah, Thomas Hayden Church as Flint Marko is incredible. He looks exactly the same, straight off the comic book page as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Sandman is a strange villain to do. He is one of Spider-Man's biggest ones. I think he was an original member of the Sinister Six. Like, I get it,
Yeah.
and to put him on screen is a absolute visual spectacle. You can do some really creative things with the Sandman character during fight scenes, and they do in this film. But if you look at the villains that we've had before, right? We've had Green Goblin, who has a connection to Peter Parker. And I think this is key. I think this is where if you have a villain that is somehow connected in some kind of personal way to the hero, that's like some really juicy drama that you can have between your antagonist and the protagonist. There was the whole father dynamic, the mentor dynamic in that first film, the kind of surrogate son almost, and then that also stokes the rivalry between Harry. There's something personal there between those two. You go into Spider-Man 2, and it's kind of a similar thing. It's like a teacher-student mentor kind of thing. The student becomes the teacher and teaches Doc Ock the lesson at the end that, the whole intelligence thing, using his own lesson against him. That's some good stuff. With this one, you have Sandman, who has absolutely nothing to do in the comic books, really, that I know of, doesn't have anything to do with Spider-Man, anything to do with Peter Parker. So how do they get around that fact? That's where you get the retconning. It's like, oh, actually, no, this guy was responsible for Uncle Ben's murder, and maybe I'm just kind of, formulating loads of ideas there. I have to assume that that was the reason why they chose to do it, because if you took that out, where's your drama there? If anything, then Sandman is just kind of like a 2-bit crook that Spider-Man's just got to go out and stop, who might have a heart of gold, but there's nothing personal there to Spider-Man. So I understand why they needed to do it. Watching these films again week to week, I do think it takes away a little bit from that moment from the first Spider-Man film with the origin story. That great bit where he pursues him to the warehouse and he falls out the window and everything, and he's got to carry that with him like as a shade of guilt, essentially, that he kind of led to that. Now in this one, it's like, oh yeah, no, I mean, he was an accomplice, but he wasn't that big a deal. It was actually this guy. I do think it takes away from that first film just a little bit. But that's saying, the cast and especially the CGI. I remember seeing this, the birth of the Sandman scene, which is one of my favorite scenes. It's absolutely incredible. That scene could be a short film as far as I'm concerned. I had never seen CGI like that before. the likeness, how real it looked, the sand, like the detail in it, like the little particles, little. Even
Yeah.
now, it looks amazing. So many years on, it looks absolutely incredible. But at the time, I was blown, like my jaw almost hit the floor watching this humanoid sand person that looked like it was real. It didn't look like CGI to me at the time. To the point where I thought it was like this weird thing of like, is it like a guy in a suit who they've dipped in like PVA glue and then put him in sand? Like it looked absolutely mad. But the music there, especially you mentioned like the score with Sandman, great main theme for him, like the villainous kind of sounding one with like the really low brass and everything. But
Yeah.
then you've got that emotional score to it as well. And I think in the rough cut, I think I was reading about Christopher Young with the score of this thing. Originally, he had like the menacing Sandman theme playing over that whole scene, like the birth of the Sandman and everything like that. And I think Raimi was like, no, we need an emotional
Ah,
score with this. So we had to go away and, come up with that. And even the editor's cut, in 2017, we got some new Spider-Man 3 content. It was an alternate cut of the film, which I still haven't. I've seen the scenes, but I've never seen it complete as one cut. So I don't know if it goes over better than this one. But there's like the sandcastle scene, which I don't know if you've seen that thrown in. It's a moment where
you've
Flint
seen it
Marco,
online.
yeah, with his wife and his daughter, and they're at the park, and there's this massive sandcastle, which is obviously Sandman. He's like built himself into. And there's a really nice emotional moment there. I think it's a great character. I think he looks great. But again, the film's dealing with so much stuff. There's a moment in this film where Sandman's just out of the film for so long. And I think because it's not that one villain dynamic where you can really build into that villain, you can really get to know them. We get like a good origin story with him. We get a good build up. We get some, neat action scenes in the city with the bank thing where he punches through him and then he has like the solid fist and knocks Spider-Man out. That's all really good stuff. But then as soon as he turns into Mudman and he's just out of the film, he's just gone. And it's like we don't know what to do with Sandman because we've got to spend some time with black suited Spider-Man and Venom right now. We'll come back to him, and then he just comes back at the end. I was shocked to think that there was no kind of resolution with the daughter story. So much of the story and the origin is built up with the Sandman character. We never even really get a payoff to it. It's quite an ambiguous ending, really, where Spider-Man forgives him and then he just drifts off
Maybe,
into the wind.
maybe with this report
Hopefully,
that the report is this isn't a spoiler.
it's in the trailer. Yeah.
Sandman, these characters have died in the new film fighting Spider-Man, and they have since said, completely forgot Lizard was alive first of all.
Yes.
Lizard and Sandman apparently died in their respective timelines at some point later. Maybe
I
that's
don't
for
know
us to
how I
find out.
feel about that because if they say that they died at the hands of Spider-Man, that kind of
That's what
ruins
I
the
meant.
ending of this film. Like I forgive
Exactly
you,
my
and then he
thoughts.
drifts off, and then it's just like, yo, there's a bank robbery. Sandman is at the bank. And it's like Spider-Man's like, I'm going to put some dirt in your eye, and then he
Gets the
goes and
water gun
kills.
out again and just puts him
Yeah,
in a jar or
exactly. Like
something.
he knows how to do it this time, but
It's
yeah, and
yeah,
apparently there's loads of footage as well that we haven't seen, even in the editor's cut. There's so many deleted scenes. Some of them you even see in the original trailer that don't make it into this film or the editor's cut. And I think the novelizations as well, and the set photos of an alternate ending that does tie up the family angle with Sandman. Apparently, it's at the very end of the fight when Sandman's just like wailing on Peter Parker and he's almost killed him. Apparently, the wife and the daughter show up there and kind of convince him not to kill Peter Parker. Then he has his change of heart. Then you have like the whole "I forgive you" scene, and then Sandman goes away with his family, and then you get onto like your final fight with Venom. I'm assuming they cut that for time because that's an awkward place to have that resolution, and then to have more action to follow with Venom. You kind of want to do like all the time that the story lines up after you've done all, you've dispatched with all your villains and you've got to it. But it is weird. It's such a massive, that is Sandman's motivation, and there's no payoff to it at all. Very ambiguous. We don't know what happened to it. Maybe we will in the new one. But again, with the new one, like Spider-Man 3, it's dealing with so many plot lines that it needs to follow up on and cobble together, and hopefully it does. But I think ultimately there could have been a great storyline there with Sandman, but because they neglect him and because he never gets any real payoff, I don't. He has nowhere near the staying power that you do with Green Goblin or Doc Ock or anyone like that. Even I would say to Harry Osborn, because at least Harry Osborn gets a payoff and an actual conclusion to his story arc.
yeah, and I think this when he. I guess it depends on Uncle Ben stuff because for Spider-Man's internal story arc, the I forgive you's earned on his behalf.
Hmm.
But is Sandman just gonna like float his way to the bank and nick the money again, and then go back to his family?
That's what I was
Uh,
thinking.
it,
Yeah.
it's such a random ending, I guess. Like, the concept works for one of it, but not the logistics of the whole thing. And again, it comes down to timing to that, and the placement of the scene as well. Like, my best friend just died. Well, this is actually how I killed your uncle. This is the real thing, and that's where I'm a bit lost on. But they have to find a way to put it in there because they need that poignant last scene of him and NJ, the sunset, which is when everyone cries. It's
Hmm.
the sunset, it's the music. We'll get to that later on, but um, yeah, it's not. There's something missing with Sandman, but I don't think we're going to get justice for it in the new one. I just think I'm really happy they're bringing him back to play Sandman
Hmm.
because we know obviously he's the mummy in the new trailer, but you're there like, are we going to get Thomas Hayden Church? Are we going to get the costume? I really hope so.
Mm.
And I'll say this for all the villains they've had in it, if you actually look at the marketing, the only one we've had like more than one shot of is kind of Doc Ock. I say one
Hmm.
shot, like Electro just in the dark, Sandman being the sand cloud, and Lizard.
Lizard's just there.
Yeah, and I'm there like I really hope we get the chance to see him before, because especially if say he's taking what I laughed at, actually really relevant. But whenever you look at him in this film, if you see it again, he's got like always a layer of sand going over him. So you can see the full body of sand, but they always have this really thin layer of sand just going over him to make it like texture movement. But it
Hmm.
just made me think of all the spice from Dune, that the spice settles on the sand above it, and you can see it like glistening over his end. I would say, and I kept
Hmm.
laughing at that. But no, Salmon, I'm very curious to see what they do with him. I think he's only been brought back in truth just to be in the Sinister Six,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
take
Yeah.
that because I think Salmon's a character that when you really break him down, he's mainly famous for being in the Sinister Six. And I'm curious to see how he can play in it, or what the scheme is, or who could potentially be trying to fight and kill what. So there's a lot of potential. But we could talk about one villain who we know isn't coming back in
We
you know
hope. Is
we
Avi
hope.
Arad still tied to this new film? I'm guessing he is.
Well, Venom might be in it, but I don't think it'll be Topher Grace's Venom. I think it'll be
No.
Tom
No.
Hardy's, and the man, the myth, the legend, Edward Brock Jr. Trash, some call him. Um, I don't know where to begin. I think it comes down to what I said earlier. I think this is a character that I feel that I don't want to say intentionally been written shit. That this is a character that everyone that works on this film is capable of making better. And for whatever reason, not one single person did it. A character that the director didn't want to be in the film is 100% always worth adding, because you can tell that isn't a character he wants to be in that film.
Hmm.
And I think casting Topher Grace, and this isn't a criticism of Topher Grace, casting an actor well known for comedic roles as your villain, a classic villain. And I'm going to add this actually: was Venom created in the early 90s?
I think he
He
is a
wasn't,
fairly recent one. Yeah. Let me
and
check real quick, but I imagine he probably is.
to 2007. That's not that long a gap in absolute truth. I don't think Venom has the rep he does now. And I think because, I mean, make or whatever Venom films you want, Tom Hardy as Venom is correct casting. No matter how bad either film has been, they nail the casting. And I think when you nail casting and you get a shit film, it's easier to work around it down the line in the future. From the seat, I mean, the fact that in this, the Venom is essentially just Spider Man. Not
Hmm.
muscular, not bigger, not physically imposing. He's literally in a Spider-Man suit with a ridiculous. I mean, we speak about how bad the lizard CGI is without giving him the snout. I think Venom's jaw is probably as important as the snout is to lizard. That
Hmm.
making Venom humanoid is what backfires, and I understand why they might have done it. But again, it's something that as the years have gone by, that is one of the very few things that looks worse and worse, because you get the great opening scene with him, you get the bell, the church, and all that, and then you see the topless Topher Grace when the suit's always covering him, and you're like, what?
Hmm.
But Topher Grace, I just think 100% biggest problem of the film, and that goes
Yeah.
back down to not just the casting. I don't want to blame the performance that much, but I think everything starts ends with Avi Arad about this problem.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. He's the villain that should never have been there. But I was reading earlier, and this kind of shocked me actually. So Raimi, the original plan was just Sandman and New Goblin, which absolutely fine. That should have been
Yep.
the movie that we got. But then I read that Raimi, even himself, kind of decided that he wanted another villain in the film. And originally he wanted Ben Kingsley as Vulture to be in the film. Now, I think that would have been way too many. Then
Ooh,
eventually we know that
yeah.
Vulture was going to be pushed to Spider-Man 4, and I think it was going to go to Malkovich in the end,
John
wasn't it? Not
Malkovich,
Ben
yeah.
Kingsley. So he was kind of pushing for another villain. He kind of toyed with the idea of maybe adding another one, and that's when Avi Arad swooped in and was like, "We're doing Venom." And Raimi hated it because I think his biggest criticism of Venom was that there's not really any humanity to Venom, and that goes back to like the villains that we'd seen before, right? It is that personal humanity, connection that he has to Peter Parker or to himself. With Sandman in this, he's the criminal with a heart of gold. What is Venom? He is just this murderous alien creature, and that's it. I did check as well. Venom was first published in February 1993, so comparatively by comic book standards,
For
very very modern. I think it's
same
kind of
gap
like
now.
Bane as well. I
That's
think Bane was quite a modern one when he was in
Dead
Batman and Robin.
Deadpool is and isn't
Yeah.
also not Carnage. Deathstroke, Deadpool. One's a
Yes.
parody of the
Yeah.
other, isn't it? But here's a horrible fact. So Venom in that film is to Venom to Spider-Man what 3 is the same gap as Spider-Man 3 to now. And I would say this, right? Venom wouldn't have been held in as high regard then as he is now, 100%.
Mhm.
And if anything, this film probably got people seeking out Venom comics because I think, to my understanding, is Spider-Man just happened to have a black suit in the comics. That was it. There was never a symbiote. There was never this. He just wore a black suit for a couple of years.
Mhm.
And then they reworked it and eventually put in, oh, there was this actual symbiote problem that's blah, 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 blah. And I think that's what a lot of comics do. They create things off the back of ideas. And I just think for 14-year legacy, look at Bane. I guess you mentioned him, this really good comparison. Bane's legacy in Batman and Robin is such a new character. You can get away with him being crap.
Mhm.
Whereas when he gets Dark Knight Rises, he's had a legacy of 20-ish years because of the comics.
Yeah.
Now, also that's done differently, but I think that's the best they could do with Bane and Batman's, well, in Nolan's Batman.
Mhm.
But I think age is a very important thing. Look at Miles Morales, right? His really good thing. 2011, I want to say he was created, and they have
Yeah.
handled
He's
that
just yeah.
so well. And I mean, I know we're not doing the Spider Verse in these reviews, but um, when the time comes to get him on big screen, because he has a legacy on consoles, on animated films, not just comics, so many things, they wouldn't fuck about with that. And
Mhm.
again, does that also come down to that our society? I mean, if Miles Morales is technically younger than the MCU, that terrifies me. But that I would say is the power of comic book films these days is that as these have got bigger, everyone has gone to the source material and learned more about them and things like that. And I think that's something that is just the nature of the beast now that you can't get away with randomly changing things like they used to do.
Yeah, I think you'd struggle with. I'm trying to think of like any other superhero. Spider-Man is the only one that I can think of where I would be perfectly happy with a Miles Morales film coming out. I was with Into the Spider-Verse, and actually, I think that when he does, the time does come for a live action Miles Morales, it's going to be a very tough act to follow. We'll probably have three Into the Spider-Verse movies by that point, the animated ones, because they did such a good job. But I couldn't imagine them doing that with a Batman. I know there have been multiple Batmans in the animated ones, but everyone knows it's Bruce Wayne. I don't think you could do that with Superman. I think it is Clark Kent, but I think now with Spider-Man, I think you could absolutely get away with having another Spider-Man with Miles Morales. I know we're going to get three of them in this new film, but like a new incarnation, someone who isn't Peter Parker essentially. But Venom. I'm not going to go into the rap.
I
Toph,
thought you were singing Eminem.
no,
Then.
no,
You know what I
I
mean?
don't, no. Topher Grace just feels he's both perfect in this film and wildly out of place in this film, I think. And if you are going by continuity in this trilogy, Eddie Brock was name dropped in the first Spider-Man film, I believe, working at the Daily Bugle. I know they get around that with Eddie Brock Jr., whatever, but yeah, because the Eddie Brock that I know is this big burly guy who, becomes Venom. I think he's like a bit of a tearaway, even in the beginning, which when he gets taken over by Venom, I think that brings it out a lot more in him. But you've got this kind of weedy sitcom guy playing Edward Brock Jr. and that's where all of like the really cringy drama comes in, and the relationship stuff. And there's a scene that just always makes me laugh, and it's, I don't know if it's meant to be taken seriously or if Raimi is sort of like self-sabotaging, but after all is said and done, and there is a setup line for this in the film, so it doesn't come out of nowhere, but it is still really funny. It's like, you want forgiveness, get religion. And at the end of the film, you have Edward Brock Jr. sitting on a pew in a church, looking at a statue of a crucifix of Jesus, praying to Jesus to kill Peter Parker because he stole his job and he stole his girlfriend. And it's just absolutely hilarious. You know, he's like, I come before you humbled and humiliated. Please, I want you to kill Peter Parker or something. It's so stupid.
There
I
was
can't even get over it. Like, it's so
there was a
mad.
wonderful tweet. I wish I could find it where I think when one of the Spider-Man trailers came out, you get the Tobey Renaissance online a lot, and it's a lot of meme era, right?
Hmm.
And I think there are a lot of like kids who don't know their stuff talking nonsense about Tobey Maguire, and just some random account tweeted saying Tobey Maguire was such a badass motherfucker. He had word I can't say online. Uh, had people praying in church for him to be killed, and they just had the quote of like, please kill Peter Parker, and it's so funny, like it's so ridiculous.
Hmm.
But again, I guess it also adds that thing like we want the church, we want the bell, we need to bring in the sound aesthetic maybe with Venom.
Hmm.
So how do we get Topher Grace at a church?
Do they do something
Like,
similar in the new Venom film? I haven't seen the new one yet, but I've heard there's a fight in a church with sound or bells or something.
yes,
Do they
there
do it
is.
again?
There's
I
yes,
don't know
it's
if
Venom
that's a
versus
thing with Venom
Carnage.
in the comics or if that's just something they've
We
started
always
from this.
I always knew it was sound orientated. I remember the animated '90s show did it,
Oh,
with the
okay.
church bells.
Maybe it
But
is a thing then.
I don't know if the comics must only be done in church. There was a really funny meme from if you've seen the first episode of Hawkeye. People like it's like an opening scene, not a spoiler. Shaq shoots a bow and it takes down a church bell, and someone did a meme of the shot, and then they just had like Venom screaming at the bottom of it. Um, but it's kind of insane what they went with for it, and not that I'm using this to sort of criticize Raimi, and I'm going to use this again to criticize Avi Arad though. How did you get some of this okay by the producer?
Mm,
Was he that obsessed with wanting Venom in? He just didn't care. He
I
just
think
wanted
so.
Venom in
Yeah.
because it's so odd that I think it's a great scene in the church moment. Um, but it's like you want to kill the spider, I want to kill. It's so cringy, and I think there's an
Shoehorned
awful.
in. It feels like a
There's
pickup, doesn't it? It feels like a reshoot.
there's an awful line from Sandman where he's like, "I don't like you, Spider Man." It's like really awful,
Oh,
and
yeah, 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 I know
And I'm
which
just
bit.
sat there saying, let's say there'd been two villains in the film. Could you have had Harry's Green Goblin go to Sandman? Probably. And again, it comes down to they've had to shoehorn Venom in because the symbiote stuff. There's some okay moments, but it's a very quick transition. Like punches MJ once, which is bad, but then it's already the church scene,
Mhm,
and there's never been the internal conflict. It's literally, I love the suit's too much, the suit's gone. Whereas
mhm.
I think if I'm gonna give some props to Tom Holland, if they were to do the symbiote, which I don't think they will, I think nowadays when they plan 5, 6 films at a time, plan trilogies at a time, you can probably have him wear it for a whole film, from the opening scene, the opening 5 minutes to the final 5 minutes, and the fact it bloody just was a comet coming to Earth and it
Yeah.
just happened to be the comet that hits Earth on the same part Spider-Man and Mary Jane are whilst they're watching stars, and just happened to turn their heads and miss this one.
Mhm. Yeah, it's just absolute nonsense, isn't it? And I think based on the ending of this, because Venom is brought in probably in like the last 15 minutes, would you say, of the film? It's so
Yeah,
late in the game that he just shows up. It does feel like a reshoot. It does feel like it feels very cobbled together with some of the stuff, especially the news footage stuff.
the taxi
You,
driver as well.
yeah, there's that. But you know how we talked about Spider-Man 1 and we think the original opening, the intended opening for the reveal of Spider-Man was going to be the World Trade
Yeah,
Center, you know, catching the robbers in between the two buildings, great cinematic shot. And then obviously they couldn't use that, and you get that montage, which is great in the first film, but it does feel very kind of slapped together, kind of last minute. Let's just get some of these to camera interview things and let's montage it. With this one, you've got, we always talk about Rick Ollie, right? In Phantom
yeah.
Menace, like just stating the obvious. I think a worse offender of that is the British news reporter in this film, where she's like, "There's no hope for Spider-Man. He is being beaten by the Sandman. The brutality of it. Can Spider-Man make it out?" It feels so awkward and thrown in. The news reporter stuff kind of set in the situation like Mary Jane, after a brief stint on Broadway, has been held hostage, and there's a message in the web like bringing Spider-Man, and there's no authentic lead up to it. It's just there's some like B-roll footage of is it like cops getting attacked by Venom or something from like a
Yeah,
previous fight scene, which I don't know if that was a deleted scene that got left on the cutting room floor. Feels so slapped together. And that like the whole ending with Venom kind of became a personal term for me. I don't know if it was like on the internet or anything. If a villain in a film got short shrift and was only in it for a little bit, I'd go, "Oh, they got venomed. Oh, they venomed this character." I remember even at the time of Dark Knight, and I've softened on this now. I understand what they were trying to do with it. I thought Two Face was going to be a big deal or make it into the third Nolan film, and he's like bought in. He's in the costume. He's out of the film. He's dead. And I was like, "Oh, they venomed Two Face," but I'd always use Venom as the descriptive for that because it is so quick. Avi Arad wanted Venom in this film. The actual Venom, the design was, I don't think it's all. If you show me a picture of it, I'd go, well, that's Venom. But they peel the face back so much, and you've got that really awkward
yeah,
Topher Grace head just stuck on this body. Um, you're right; he doesn't look big. He doesn't look imposing or muscular like the Tom Hardy one does now. Um, he feels very scrawny and wimpy and kind of Spider-Man's frame, and it just doesn't work. When the actual mouth is there and you've got the jawline and a bit of the tongue, it looks great, and they should have kept that more. But every time it like peels back, and you've got Topher Grace with like the weird claws that he's got as well, and he's like, "Oh, my Spidey sense is tingling," if you know what I'm talking about. It's so bad, and even the voice, the Venom voice, it doesn't sound deep. It doesn't feel like it's modulated or anything. That feels wimpy. So I mean, congratulations, Avi Arad. Like, you got what you wanted, but I feel like you could have done Venom a lot better. If you were going to have Venom and all this action in there,
yeah.
make him look better, make him more terrifying, because I really don't think it is when it comes down to it.
And I think as well, I remember when the trailer came out for the Tom Hardy Venom film, you had that one shot of the face going on, "We are Venom,"
Mm.
bite the head off it, can't remember, but
Yeah, that's right.
why it wouldn't have been hard to make that design in 2007. You see CGI looks great in this film. Put the snout on, put the tongue on, do all that stuff, but I don't understand what they were doing. I understand I
Do you think
kind
it
of
was the
do,
need to make it practical again? Because it is a suit for a lot of it, isn't it? Is it
and they
augmented with
wanted Topher
CGI?
Grace to be it,
Yeah.
yeah, and I know in the new film they have like Venom's head as like a double head thing, like at the Star Wars commentators from the pod race. It looks weird, but I just think they completely got the design wrong for the new one. And yeah, I think you are right. Maybe they wanted it practical, maybe because Sandman's CG, they wanted a practical villain to go alongside it, or Doc Ock was always practical, so they
Mhm.
could mirror it. But I just think it was too much for Cats of Venom. Anyway, it's just I don't know. I hate using that disappointing because I wasn't disappointed because I didn't care. I don't know a lot about the character. I didn't know he was in it until I picked up a comic book in a shop for God's sake, and it's just quite bonkers what they went with. But I think what makes it sad is that between this Venom and the film, they got the actual Venom films. They've got it right between them, but never individually.
Mhm.
Because at least this Venom was born off of Spider-Man, which is the core concept of the character, not just going to keep finding hosts until one works. Because that's like a weird. That seems like more like a Doctor Who Venom than anything else. Um, but yeah, the Venom, and I just by the time you get to Harry's death, and I love the music bit when he's ringing all the bells and all that. I love the whole
Mhm.
science thing, but by the time you get to just Venom making screaming sounds, Harry jumping in the way, did Venom really need to do a super evil slow mo jump with a glider that he can
Mhm.
just absolutely launch and web at him if he wanted to? And again, not to nitpick, but it's not satisfying how the death of Harry Osborn is and is handled well. And the fact he does, I think he was also going to sacrifice himself for Spider Man
Mhm.
to redeem himself and all that. And it's great. And I think, do they get away with it because they handle Harry's redemption? I don't know. But as far as the villainous angle goes, they got it wrong.
And I always hypothesize as well because, come the end of this film, there is still a bit of the symbiote left.
Yeah.
Kurt Connors has got it in the little thing. And I always wondered because I know that Lizard wasn't going to be the villain in the next film. I know Sam Raimi really wanted it. I think the following film was going to be Was it just Vulture with a cameo from Mysterio, or was it going to be Mysterio
No, no,
and
it was going to be
Vulture?
Vulture and Lizard with a
Oh, it was
cameo
going to be
by
both.
Mysterio,
Because I
which
always
was
wondered, would the symbiote, would he use something from that or extrapolate something from the symbiote and apply it to something else to try and graft his arm back or something? I don't know, because I always thought that would come into play, and maybe that would have made the Venom thing a little bit easier to swallow because it would have led into something. I don't know. I'm just guessing at this point. But come the end of the
no.
film, there is still a bit of the symbiote left in there, and it's in Dr. Kurt Connors' lab. So
I
I don't
think
know.
it would have been a great way to have done Lizards. We knew they wanted to do their Lizards. We had the actor who had played him twice before it would have happened, which I think might maybe in Spider-Man 2 it was just a random, hey, we're just going to cast the scientist that existed in this film. We've got Dr. Octopus. They're only the scientists we can use to be friends with him. You get, as you said, the warning sign on the phones, but yeah, it goes back to that Spider-Man 4 missed opportunity. Well, it's not even a missed opportunity. It's something that should have took place never did.
Mhm.
And then you get the disgraceful, again, not an Andrew Garfield. No one will want a CGI villain. Then goes on to
Yeah,
do CGI villain anyway and looks
yeah.
worse.
It's
Um,
amazing to me because all these villains that Raimi wanted to do all this time, and the producers kept shutting him down. They're all the next villains that they turned out
yeah,
in all the future films.
and then they're bringing the
Electro,
other ones
Lizard.
back.
Yeah.
They're bringing. Hey, look, we finally done. We're going to give Electro another go. We're going to bring Lizard back. We're going to bring Sandman back. We're going to bring Goblin back. We're going to bring Doc Ock back.
Did
Is
we
there
work
anyone we're
out
not
which year
bringing?
it would have been if they'd have done Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6? Which year it would have been?
So May 2011 was fully confirmed for Spider-Man 4. There is a famous tweet when Twitter was new of Sony Pictures confirming the Spider-Man 4 is it. Now, it went viral this year because it was 10 years to the day in which Spider-Man 4 should have come out. But it didn't mean you want to joke because there's a 2 year gap between 1 and 2,
Then the
a 3 year
3.
gap between 2 and 3, a 4 year gap between 3 and 4. So
Surely not a 5.
Spider-Man 5 would have come out in 2016 and Spider-Man 6 in 2022.
Oh
We've
man.
got are we getting Tobey Maguire in December 2021? Maybe. So maybe there's justice. Hey, and they're always going to build up to fight in the Sinister Six, right? If
Yep.
he's in it, they're fighting the
Yep.
Sinister Six. Maybe something went right all along. Who knows?
Well, we'll
But
find out in a
nah,
month's time, won't we? Not even a month's time, a couple of weeks' time now at this point.
16 days.
Hopefully it's good. Hopefully it's good. Right, let's talk about some of the side characters then. So we've got Aunt May listed, but honestly, I really don't have a whole lot to say about her. She's there for the monologues again. She does them well. I think a lot of people really come down on thunder on her monologues in this one, like the what she waffling on about the whole proposal story with Uncle Ben. I love that stuff. It's good
Yeah,
character stuff. She does it well. It's emotional. Brings Uncle Ben back into the fold again. So don't have a problem with that at all.
it reminds
Um,
me of unfortunate events because she goes like, "Oh, we swam to the island on our date." I was like, "Oh,
Aunt
it's like the
Josephine.
leeches." Yes, the
Yeah.
leeches in unfortunate events. Very different Uncle Ben origin story if you go back to it.
Oh god, I'm never gonna hear that the same way now. I'm always gonna
No.
think of that. It's brilliant. Shall we just talk about do you have anything to say about Aunt May? Like, is there much else to say about her in this film in particular?
Every time Rosemary Harris comes on screen, it's just comforting.
Oh,
I
she's
think
an
that's
absolute joy. Yeah.
you can say in every one of these films, and it's what you want from that kind of character that she should be comforting. And I think you look at, I mean, not to sort of go overboard on Rosemary Harris, but an actress that has had an incredible career. I think she even won an award in 2019 for doing theatre still in the
Oh
90s.
wow.
And she's one of them where, she'd pop up for 2 or 3 scenes and she's going to be great in the scenes. And I like the monologues, keep them coming. They're kind of, she has to shape who Peter is. And, whenever I think in this, you get a great moment where obviously they discover the new killer. Well, not only does Spider-Man quote kill him, it's the whole, we've got that theory that she knows. She knows he's Spider-Man, and Peter Parker's smugly, haha, Spider-Man killed the murderer. And she's like, but Spider-Man would never do that. And I love, again, it's a scene, but it's a monologue, but it's what you want from her that, her character is always who Peter should be and who he's
Mhm.
raised to be. And I've always loved that dynamic. And I know this is ridiculous, but I guess this kind of wraps up the trilogy with her that she is the moral compass to Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and she will always be the living piece of guilt about Uncle Ben's death.
Yeah.
And I don't think any of the other films have handled that well enough because they try and give Aunt May too much to do. She doesn't need to do much. She could just come in for a couple of scenes. We don't need Secret Agent Aunt May, and we don't need monetizing Aunt May. And we've had both of them since. So who knows? Maybe the new one she'll start doing speeches or die. I don't know. But
I don't
tell you
think
this
so.
though,
I couldn't.
if
Yeah,
Rosemary Harris pops up in this new film, I will probably
I'll
cry
cry.
as well.
I'll cry.
I don't
Yeah.
think she will, but that would have been the ultimate sort of sleeper hit from lockdown. Is
Mhm.
forget not getting Andrew in. If they find a way to squeeze Rosemary Harris in, that will just be unbelievable. Maybe she's got great nieces and nephews. Who knows?
Well, we could see Tobey Maguire and we could be over the moon, and then Rosemary Harris shows up. It's like, oh, sorry, Tobey
The
Maguire,
portal scene.
we've had a higher bidder. We've got Rosemary Harris is in the house. Like, I'm more concerned about her now. I'd love to see her, but then again, I'd just love to see every character from this whole
Yeah.
trilogy come back. Mr. Dickovich, who gets some great scenes in this film as well, of course. Oh God, I might be jumping ahead to favorite scenes. I don't want to quote them all like I did last week, but he is good boy. He must be in some kind of trouble. You got Ursula as well, who's absolutely adorable in
Yeah.
this film. So nice. She's just absolute treasure. Love her character. Um, and then the big one, which we're going to talk about now. We're probably going to quote all of his scenes as well. We're going back to the Bugle with this one. So J. Jonah Jameson, what do you think to his scenes in this one? Do you think they go a step too far with some of them, with the whole buzzer at the desk? Do you think they go a bit too far, or do you think it's still as good as the other two?
Right. This is where I've always been on this. I think you've got this absolute prime, unstoppable force of J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. I don't think you will ever be able to top Spider-Man 2's J. Jonah Jameson.
Mhm.
I know he's back, and I know we've had the sort of the modern version of him, the podcast version, but the podcast in the Spider-Man game, which is great to hear. You've had the version, obviously, on the new film. I think there's a TikTok account now. Don't have that with TikTok. That's showing my age now, isn't it? I have all the other ones. Um, but in this, I think off the back of Spider-Man 2, there is nothing sadder than seeing a comedy character who stops being funny.
Mhm.
Doesn't matter what it is, the comedian that stops being funny is always a sad moment. By locking him in anger management pills, maybe it's too much, but you get him restrained. And I think that's what you needed for Spider Man 3. Because there's not an awful lot of him in Spider Man 1, and 2 took it to the next level. And I don't think 3 could reach that. So I don't know what their long term goal was. He would have been in Spider Man 4, sure. But have him quiet, and I think with him being quiet, you still got great lines, and it just play. I think you get the best out of oh my god, how have I forgotten her name? Betty Brant's actress,
Got Elizabeth Banks. Yeah.
Elizabeth Banks. That's it, and I think it gives her moments to shine because a lot of the comedy is
Yeah.
her on him, and I don't, and we've not had Jay Jonah be at the level of you're the joke this time. It's him making the jokes, and now I've kind of said that out loud. It's just clicking. I think it's right up there still. It's 100% up there still. But by not making him that, not doing the laugh again, all that kind of stuff, they just tailored him in a new way, and I think that's what this film needed.
Yeah, no, I agree that I don't have a problem with it, but it is a different dynamic than it is in the first two. But there is that great payoff to it as well, where we can see him wanting to just explode, can't we? Like every time,
Exactly.
J.K. Simmons plays it so well, and then you do get the payoff as well, where it cuts to outside the office. He's like, "That is the dumbest idea you've ever had, and you've had some doozies." So you do get like the classic one that and there are some brilliant lines in there, even ones that I didn't even remember. Again, like I've seen these scenes so many times. Like I could quote them all pretty much, but even watching it today, some were catching me off guard that I hadn't really paid much attention to. The bit where he keeps getting Edward Brock Jr.'s name wrong. He calls him like Bernstein. He calls him something else, and he keeps correcting him. I love that. The bit where he says, "I'll give you $50 or something." He goes, "It's cheaper too," or something like that. So he's always about the money, isn't he? He's just fantastic. He's brilliant. Hoffman as well in this with the I think I got this
Yeah,
cross with last week or the week before. I couldn't They were all kind of interchangeable for me when he's got the catchphrase, it's hip, it's now, it's wow and how. And yeah, Elizabeth Banks really comes into her own. My favorite line in this whole film, my favorite J.K. Simmons moment, other than the laugh in Spider-Man 2, is where you've got emo Peter and he's putting the charm on Betty Brant, and he's like, I was like, Miss Brent, that is not the position I hired you for. But it's brilliant. It always gets me, and it got me today. Yeah, I just can't say enough.
Another one.
Yeah,
It's does anyone care what I want? I do.
I do.
Shut up. Shut up. It's and the thing is, it's not the bit that's not funny. It's not Jay
Amazing.
Jonah. It's Hoffman. It's the way he does that. I do, and like his head like pops up off the camera lens.
Doesn't he walk out from like the neighboring office just to say that, and then
Yeah,
like walk back in?
it's just, it's so well done, and I mean, it's not even funny, but the whole subplot of getting the full-time job at the Daily Bugle is actually quite not an interesting spot. It's natural, right? Like he's no longer
Mhm.
the freelancer, and you get the others in there, and it's a bit deep. But the Eddie Brock stuff again, it's set up well. But Topher Grace isn't. You could picture a dodgy Tom Hardy smugly trying to get a dodgy Photoshop of Spider-Man, and you could picture Tom. I don't see Topher Grace ever photoshopping Spider-Man. And it's that kind of thing that you need with that
Mhm.
character. Eddie Brock. You need the slimy photographer, and he's just a loser. They're both.
Is that
I
why?
guess they're both losers in their own right.
Is that why the visual effects? Oh, what's his name? Dykstra, is that his name? Is that
John
why he didn't
Dykstra.
come back for this film because he was busy doing the photoshopped image for Topher Grace's character? He made Photoshop, didn't he? He created it, didn't he? I
No, that
think.
was who's the one from
Or is it a different one?
Not John. No, that's a comedian. Oh god, that's gonna annoy me
Oh,
now. He did
the
he came with the idea of Rogue One.
yeah.
Um,
I didn't know if it
maybe
was that same guy who did the
he
visual
is
effects
one
in
of
this
the
film.
other. No, it is John Knoll. Ignore me. It is John
Oh,
Knoll.
it is. Yeah, I was getting
I
mixed up
think
with
he
it.
may have worked with John Dykstra ILM though. I think they all worked on the prequels with
Mhm.
each other so easily. But I didn't realize he didn't come back. That might also explain a lot about Venom.
Yes, maybe. But I wanted to mention like the last thing that I'll say about J.K. Simmons, and I might be reading way too much into this as well. But in the first one where Green Goblin crashes and he says like, "Who takes the pictures of Spider-Man?" And then he's like, he doesn't give up that it's Peter Parker, and he's got some integrity to him even in that situation. I love that when it's disclosed to him that it's a fake, that the pictures are fake, he goes straight into business mode. He's like, "Pack your things, get out. You've basically disgraced this company and the name of the
Yeah,
paper." And he doesn't seem like the over the top,
he's not joking
JJ
either.
Jameson. He is like, you know,
An editor.
you're ashamed. Yeah, pack your things, get out. I don't want to see you again. And I don't know. It's like a really small moment. I'm reading way too much into it, but I like that he does. It only might be for like a scene or like a fraction of a scene, but he does have that. Like he is legit at his job, despite being
Yeah.
absolutely crazy and
And what did you say?
unhinged.
I haven't had to print was it a withdrawal he calls it?
Retraction or something,
I
is
haven't had
it?
to print a retraction in 20 years. And I was like, I've always asked like, I want to know what they had to retract last time.
We'll never know. We'll never know. The only other side character I want to talk about as well is Bruce Campbell's cameo. This is my favorite cameo out of all of them. He's been great in the other ones, but he feels like a fully fledged character in this one. With the whole elongated skit with the French waiter, he's just brilliant when he's like, "That is what I said, Pecker." And then, but the bit that always gets me is when he keeps thinking that Peter Parker's signaling to the table to bring the ring out and the
Yeah.
orchestra, and it's like they repeat that like a few times, and he gets more and more sort of like angry and frustrated at his staff. And it's when he like claps his hands, he's like fuck off, like it's so brilliant. I just love Bruce Campbell, and I'm hoping beyond all hope. I mean, he probably ain't going to be in this new Spider-Man film. They got too many people in there, but in Doctor Strange, at least with that being a Sam Raimi film, he's
Yeah.
got to be in there somewhere. And the mind boggles of how he's going to bring him into that if he does, which I really hope is the case.
Yeah. And this is where I stand with it that is it selfish for me to say that if he's going to be in, we know he's going to be, they've announced him for the new film, not Spider Man, sorry, Doctor Strange.
Mm-hmm.
Could he be the Mysterio cameo? I don't think they'd let it happen.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a part of me thinks, could they? Would they? Because it could be a passing 3 second. I mean, if it's going to be, I mean, I guess we can't really guess until after the new film's out, but it's called the Multiverse of Madness. They can do whatever they want. They might go to 100 different multiverses in 100 seconds. But if we could just get that one storyboard we know of
Mm-hmm.
Mysterio and walks away in cuffs, maybe don't even show his face, and we'll know it's him, and then bring him in another cameo down the line. But I think you're right. I think it's probably his best cameo on paper. And I just think it's the comedic timing of it. It's not easy to do comedy. And at a scene that's meant to be a dramatic restaurant proposal scene, it's the way it's almost two cameos because you've got the face to face, the dialogue, but then you have the entire table dynamic.
Mhm.
and the song being played as well. It just works so well, and you don't get too little of him, and you don't get too much of him. It's exactly how you want a cameo to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Christ, I'm trying to think if there's any other character. I think we've pretty much combed through them all. In all honesty, I can't think of really any other ones. Which I guess takes us on to favorite scenes. I guess we can throw some least favorite scenes or infamous scenes in there. I guess we can throw those in there. Um, Obviously, low hanging fruit. Every single J. Jonah Jameson scene are always my favorite. That's still always the case. But my all-time favorite scene in this film in particular is the birth of the Sandman, as I've always, the effects in there coupled with the music. It's just there's no dialogue. It's all imagery, and it's just fantastic. It's like an animated short film, and I absolutely love it. So that would probably always be at the top of the pack. Um, Harry's death always gets me. It hits that
Yeah,
emotional beat. So no matter how ridiculous the film gets, or however many feet it puts out of line during the course of the film, it nails that ending, and it always does get an emotional reaction out of me. Um, some of the action choreography in this one really takes us, a step up a notch as well. I love the choreography in Spider-Man 2. I think that's still probably arguably the best with, the clock tower stuff and the train sequence, but not a great lead up to this scene, but the crane going out of control. I love that slow mo bit where he goes. The sound effects in this film are great, like the
yeah,
sound mixing. I noticed it a lot more in this film when he goes through like the narrow crane and then he like backflips. He kicks off that block as he's going towards Gwen Stacy. Love that part. The bit where he's free falling with Sandman and Venom as well, and it's like the slow mo punching between the two of them. Love all of that stuff, and like the whole tag team fight at the end with Harry Osborn. It's just some great action. The way that it's stage planned out, you can tell everything was planned meticulously. The way that they move off each other and work off each other to do what they got to do. So yeah, they're probably my favorite scenes in the film overall, or favorite moments.
I think that what I want to say. I mean, I'm going to need to rewatch Amazing Spider-Man 2 to give it the fair comparison. I'm surprised at how good the swinging was in this. I know that sounds really
Mhm.
dumb, but Spider-Man 2 looked great. Spider-Man at its moment is that CGI advancement that it's not something you can just do in camera for what the character of Spider-Man is. But I think this film has some really good sequences, and I think when it's him in costume, it looks so much better than the digital double of him. Just naturally, still, it's
Yeah.
still 2007. It's not 2021. You can't do what they can do now. But this, you mentioned the saving Gwen running between all that sequence stuff looks great. Um, Favorite sequences. I've always loved the birth of Venom. I think it's the music. I mean, you mentioned the music. I think it's massively underrated. The score and this score has never been released to listen
Hasn't
to.
it?
Never
Not
ever.
at all.
I've tried.
That's mad.
Not even YouTube. You can get the opening title themes as anything, but I don't understand why.
That
And it's
amazes
sort
me.
of mad. We sit here like 14 years later, and you can't listen to it properly. I believe there were track names listed once, but you've never been able to get the complete soundtrack. I don't understand how, why. Maybe they're listening. Who knows? But that being said, I'm going to put Harry's death. Maybe I think it's a scene that's earned over three films. It's the whole sunset. It's the choir. It's all of it coming together. The mistakes you made. But at the end of the day, they are three friends sat there, and I just think it was the perfect way. And I think now we get to look at this as maybe not an incomplete story, but certainly by how much worse would it have been if Raimi had never tied this together, the trilogy. Imagine it was like Amazing Spider-Man when you got the second one and you'd have never got that Harry Osborn becoming the Goblin or something, but this closed off the character arcs. It allowed them to move forward, and it unnaturally became the right ending for the trilogy. Now
Mhm.
the stories aren't over, as we know, or maybe know. We know that stuff happens after, apparently, with Sandman. So maybe December 15th will be proven wrong, but I think at the moment it was a perfect ending for a trilogy. And the fact not that it ended on a downer, it didn't end with him swinging around New York. It was him and Mary Jane together again,
Mhm.
back in a kind of relationship. And that's the way it should have been. And I think, let's say they're both back in the new film, they're just them two together in a building or a house with babies. That's going to have its own payoff looking at it down the line. So it's I really like the ending. I think it's earned, and don't think there's many things in this film that were earned.
Mhm.
Um, I'm trying to think if there are any other great scenes. I mean, it's not like with Spider-Man 1 2, I just had the entire film, but with this, truly great scenes there aren't that many. If I'm going to be absolutely blunt.
They're in
If I'm
there
honest,
though. You got to look. You got to look a little bit deeper for
well,
them, I guess. But
exactly. I think the scenes in this have more meaning than they do quality, and
mm,
I think again that comes down to Mr. Aviara sticking his notes in where it doesn't belong and sort of
mm,
messing with things. Because could you imagine if Harry had been the main villain for the entire film and then had a redemption, like a Darth Vader type thing?
mm,
That would have just been incredible. But
yeah.
unfortunately, we didn't get that thanks to
Would
Venom.
have got more Sandman as well, maybe more action set pieces with
Yeah,
him. Who knows? Before talking about, because I do want to talk about the ending scene, because I think that will kind of like tie into final thoughts and the future of hopefully where it's going to go come a few weeks time. So Danny Elfman didn't come back to do the score for this one. I kind of touched on this last week, but he had an absolute miserable time working with Sam Raimi on Spider-Man 2. I don't know what the reasons are. I've looked for interviews. I've looked for more information on it. I think it was just a clash of ideals, or maybe Danny Elfman didn't feel like he had the freedom on that score, maybe as much as he wanted to have. Um, so Christopher Young was announced. I haven't really checked. This might not be the best time to do it. I haven't really checked what other scores Christopher Young's done, but I really love his score to this one. But reading this, and this is an example of good studio interference or producer interference. Apparently, a lot of the score had to be recomposed from scratch because the producers felt that there weren't enough themes used from the previous films. So I'm going to assume that Christopher Young came in kind of, maybe he used the main Spider-Man theme in the intro and brought it in every now and then, but that was it, and created a completely new score for it. Apparently, ultimately, new themes for the love story, Aunt May and Mary Jane, were dropped. So he was going to have a whole new romantic theme in there and character themes which absolutely wouldn't have worked. So I'm glad that the producer stepped in there and said, no, you're playing the Danny Elfman theme there. You're using these themes that have been used before. So I think that's a good example of, the studio stepping in. But the new themes that are presented, other than that awful one that plays in the fight scene between Peter and Harry at the apartment, other than that one, they're absolutely fantastic. The main theme of this is my favorite variation on the main theme out of all three of them, because when it hits
yeah,
that Sandman theme, when it hits that Venom theme, it's incredible. When if I'm like singing along to the Spider-Man song, like the score or whatever, humming along to it, I always want to instinctively go into this version when it goes into that Venom fanfare. The bit where you first get the black suit reveal, and everything goes black, the camera pulls out of the eye, it's quiet, and he's on the side of the building, and then da 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 da, and it kicks in. Oh, it's so good. And even Sandman's theme, it works. And what's beautiful about it is that Christopher Young, great composer on his own, the sound of his score sounds like an Elfman score. For the longest time, I never even realized that this wasn't Danny Elfman. I know it's in the opening credits that he didn't do the music,
yeah.
but I wasn't looking for that stuff as a kid, and I probably wasn't looking for that stuff for many years after that, in fact. He just captured that sound so well. And a lot of that is from using the old themes, but I think even the new ones, the Venom theme, the Sandman theme, it sounds like a Danny Elfman score. It feels at home with the kind of sound that Danny Elfman was doing for the villain themes for Green Goblin, for Doc Ock. I think it's an incredible score. And that bit at the end as well, Harry's death, when it kicks in with the sunset shot, beautiful score. And I actually didn't know about the score, so that really depresses me, because I was going to go and listen to that score in isolation tonight, the ending song, and apparently I can't do that now unless someone's ripped the audio out of the film, I
I was
guess, and
I was
done
gonna
it that
say,
way.
I think what you get with trailer music, I think a lot of people have ripped it to try and make scores, but whenever I've been on Reddit, it's always so many questions of why can't we get the score? Why can't we get the score? And it's crazy, 14 years and it's never
Why
been used.
haven't they
Maybe there's a
released it?
rights issue
Maybe, but
because the soundtrack they released was like the mixed artists. And
yeah.
speaking of the music, I'm gonna bring it up. I loved the Snow Patrol song. Don't know anything about Snow Patrol, but I remember back in the day, I always say I'm not the one that listens to music. Obviously, I've got two older sisters in the mornings before school that always play, like E4 would always have music in the mornings and things like that. And I remember the Snow Patrol music video with the little kid and the Spider Man on stage. Always liked the Snow
Is it the
Patrol
end
song.
credit? Is that the end credits song?
Yeah, that's it.
I
Yeah,
listened to the credits today, and because I think I asked that the first week, you got the Chad Kroger song, like, and they say that a hero, and I never knew if Spider-Man 2 and 3 had music similar to that in the credits, but I guess all three of them did, and I never knew it. But I listened to the sound, the credits today, and I really like the song as well. I never realized that was such, Snow Patrol that did the music. So that kind of blew my mind right now.
yeah. it's sad because every time you do go to search it, you don't get the actual soundtrack. But um, I just remember, and yeah, it's one of those interesting ones where maybe down the line they'll release it. Who knows? But it is odd that even after 14 years, they haven't.
I can't
I
believe
said
that. Yeah.
maybe there's a rights issue. Maybe different people arguing over who contributed what. It's
Mm.
a very odd predicament for a big blockbuster because you see soundtracks for terrible films released and
Especially
nothing
a
for this.
film as
So,
big as this, you know? Like,
and
maybe
it's a
it's
good
Elfman? I
soundtrack.
can't imagine that. Maybe it's something to do with Elfman because he had
This
the
is what I
original
think.
themes in it.
Because whenever I'm just looking at my Rogue One on the shelf, it credits Giacchino, but it says themes composed by John Williams.
Mhm.
Maybe it's something as minor as that they get into disputes, but I don't know. But it's a very, very odd scenario. But yeah, moving on from music though. Final thoughts on Spider-Man 3. I'm I'm going to say I'm going to try and do it short and sweet. I'm not very good at doing things short and sweet, but I think it's underrated, yet has issues. Underrated by the many, uh, underestimated by the few. I don't know if that even works, but I think it's a film that if it came out today, amongst the midst of 6 or 7 comic book films a year, we'd have just moved on. Like Black
Mhm.
Widow. We saw it, moved on. Shang-Chi, I know you're not too big a fan. It's great. We can move on. Eternals, Spider-Man's out of 2 months. I don't need to sit down and mellow about this for a year. Iron Man 2. Oh, look, here's an Avengers prequel. Oh, this film didn't work out for us. Maybe that'll have a problem with our big plans for a cinematic universe. So, I think there's a lot of people. I understand where someone comes from, or what Spider-Man 2 did, what 1 and 2 did for the comic book films, the quality of them, and the state dropped this for the Venom diehards, who will then still say they like the new one, even though that's arguably has less to do with Venom than this. Um, it's got its problems, without a shadow of a doubt, but I still think this is an entertaining, fulfilling film. And watching it as a part of a trilogy in the build up to a new film, I still think this sets the bar of what should be to come. And also, let's be honest, you're not going to top Spider-Man 2.
No, exactly. I mean, the last two reviews that we did, we basically said Spider-Man 1 and Spider-Man 2 are perfect films. We really struggled, if anything, to even find a negative in those films, and I stand by that. This one, there's obviously a lot more negatives in there. But I do think this film gets really oh god, as I almost kicked my microphone over, gets really short shrifted, because I don't think it's awful. I think there are way worse comic book films out there that came out at the time. I think the year previous, X-Men: The Last Stand, is way worse than this, for
Yeah.
example. The action, I think that's probably one of the best standout points of this is the action in the film. I think it's choreographed very well. I think it's planned out very well, and it's visually entertaining. I think by the end of the film, although it's had a shaky road, although it's had some meandering storylines and pacing issues, and too many characters to really focus on any of them, so it kind of spreads itself too thin. But by the end of the film, I do think it finds its footing. It does come together, and it does culminate in a very emotionally fulfilling ending. It feels like a bittersweet ending. The end of Spider-Man 1, Spider-Man 2, you had like the heroic swing away. And I always thought it was weird that we never got one in this film, but I think it would have been out of place. Like, could you imagine, like, Harry Osborn's just dead, just died beforehand. You've got the kind of reconciliation, although we don't really know whether it's going, whether they're going to give it another go with Mary Jane and Peter Parker, or if they're going to call it quits and it's like a last meeting. And then to go in like this heroic swing away with the Danny Elfman score behind it, I think that would have been weird. So in many ways, it's kind of like the perfect ending to the film. Even though we were going to get a Spider-Man 4, 5, and 6, and it was going to continue, it's kind of more emotional for me now knowing that this is like the final scene of this trilogy. But it
Yeah.
feels like it's kind of a fitting end in some way. In retrospect, it's a very strange situation. So if someone says they hate Spider-Man 3, if they're a comic book fan, if you are a fan of the Spider-Man comics like through and through, and you can't deal with what they do with Eddie Brock and Venom and Gwen Stacy and so many other characters in there as well, I will completely understand, because I'm the same with Batman. If there's Batman characters that are handled wrong or differently, I'm kind of up in arms about that most of the time. But as exactly what you said, I think it's a very entertaining film. I think when it finds its emotional beats, it does them well. And being the end of a trilogy, that's kind of what you want from the end of a trilogy. You want it to tie up all these loose threads and plot lines that have been set up, and it does that with the Harry Osborn stuff perfectly. So it's like the high end of average for me on this one, but I still like it. I still very much go to it, and I just think if we're going to talk about the trilogy as a whole now as well, This is an immensely important trilogy in my life, and just, loving films, loving superhero characters. Um, Spider-Man will always have that special place in my heart, and it completely came from the 90s show, but especially from these films. And I think that in like cinematic history, if you're looking at the comic book genre, this is one of the most important series of films that has ever been made in that
Yeah.
genre. I don't think you would have the films nowadays if this film hadn't come out, along with some other ones. You could argue the X-Men films as well, but this really took it to the next level. And in many respects, especially when it comes to a lot of the emotional scenes, and even some of the action as well, I don't think it's anything to come out that's even got close to it, in all honesty, from the
No.
Amazing Spider-Man films. Even the newer ones, I don't think has hit the emotional heights of this trilogy, or even some of the spectacle of some of the action scenes. And hopefully, they changed that in this new one. It is going to be set in New York, which will be nice. Who would have thought having a Spider-Man film actually set in New York would look visually appealing? But yeah, they're just terrific, perfectly casted, right off the comic book page, brilliant score, interesting direction, and yeah, just nails it easily, head and shoulders, the top paragons of the genre that it's in. The Spider-Man trilogy, it's just tremendous.
Yeah, and this is the thing of a trilogy. How many great trilogies are there, let alone comic book trilogies? And there's a lot of comic book trilogies now because they keep churning them out in the MCU.
Mhm.
So it's one of them where you're right. You look at where the not just this franchise but the characters, the Marvel stuff went after this. So much is owed to Spider-Man. This was the highest grossing Spider-Man film until Far From Home. I keep getting them mixed up still. Far From Home.
Yeah.
Homecoming didn't get near it. Far From hit a bill, and that was the post Avengers tax basically. You're the first film after Endgame. Of course, you're going to cross a
Mhm.
billion. Every Marvel film hit a billion. I think from Captain Marvel through to no, Captain Marvel was after Infinity War.
Yeah, so
There's
Infinity
basically a
War
streak.
onwards.
There's a streak before even
Oh,
yeah, the
Black
Captain
Panther.
Marvel. No, because Ant-Man and the Wasp didn't. Uh,
Oh, of course.
um,
Yeah. There's the
but
comment. Yeah,
the
that's
logic's
right.
there. Every Marvel film is now a
Yeah.
billion-dollar film. They weren't billion-dollar films back then, and this was a humongous hit. Adjusted for inflation, this is probably more than Far From Home in truth. But I just think what this franchise did, what this trilogy set up for people to follow. I think me and you spoke before off the record about what the concept of trilogy is. I always think, to me personally, my favorite trilogy is the one that has an overarching story, but they will stand alone within that trilogy.
Yeah.
And I think for me, it was the Spider-Man films that set that in motion. That's why things like Pirates of the Caribbean, I can't see it as a trilogy because to me, that's just two stories. There's Pirates 1, and then you've got 2 and 3.
Mhm.
But Spider-Man, you're telling the story of Peter Parker. You're doing that well over 3 films. You're developing him. You take him to the highest, the lows. You've got his friendship group around him who are going to get mostly going to get those struggles, the antagonists, the protagonists, and you can watch them all together. You can watch them individually. You can watch them in any order you fancy. Any film that takes your picking, you can do it. And I don't think you can do that for any more. And without sounding like old man yells at cards again, it was a simpler time. There was no setting up 10 films off one film. There was no branch tree. And this isn't even a dig at the MCU. This is the next Spider-Man film that came several years later.
Mhm.
When Oscorp is a conspiracy theory, like the Illuminati, and we're going to expose them. It's a Spider-Man film. It needs to be anything more than that. Tell the story of Peter Parker / Spider-Man and how he's struggling with day-to-day life whilst being a hero. It's so simply done, yet it's never been done better.
Mhm.
And you know what? For all intents and purposes, No Way Home could be better. It's got 3 Spider-Man in, hopefully. So I really think there's a chance it could be, but the level has been set by this trilogy. And I think they're at the top of this hill that people clamour to get near. Maybe the Spider Verse could become a trilogy. I think that's got a hell of a
Mhm.
chance at being right up there. But I just think this trilogy did so much for modern day comic book cinema. There are a lot of lessons learned, and the guy that created the MCU, I said he crafted and he worked on those first 2 Spider-Man films, and I think he
He
took
was
a lot of lessons
executive.
from
He
them
was executive on this one as
on
well. I
this
did
as
check
well.
earlier.
There
Yeah.
we go. The trilogy, the first trilogy, he probably completed properly, and I just think, yeah, we were robbed. It's hard to look so positive when there was theft, but the anger is at the lowest it's ever been because there may be a resurrection in 16 days at the time of recording. 14 days, 2 weeks today by the time this video
Mhm.
goes up. We may know the truth. When this goes up, yeah, we're in a whole new realm of possibility. But I just have to sort of not even end it like this, but just say that, there is a reason Tobey Maguire is the best. There's a reason Garfield says it. There's a reason Tom Holland says it. He is the best. He set standards. And that is by Tobey Maguire, that is the era, that is Sam Raimi's direction. That's the supporting characters, that's the villain development. There's a lot going on there. It's not an easy thing to do, yet Sam Raimi made it look so easy in a time where there's more pressure on these films than there ever will be for the next load of Marvel films that come out. Because now it's a safe bet. You can have one bomb in the midst of 28 films. But can you take one bomb in a trilogy? No, you can't.
Mhm. I think it just captures the heart, doesn't it? I think fundamentally, which a lot of them maybe have come close to or don't even attempt at all, and it just doesn't feel the same. But I'm like that with a lot of films now, in all honesty. I'm like, yeah, but it doesn't have the heart, it doesn't have the charm as the originals, and I'm hoping this new one does, at least for Holland's trilogy. I guess we can sort of like look to the future then of Tobey. Could we potentially get a return of Tobey in the future? Obviously, he might crop up in this new one. Pretty sure. I think that's a safe bet that he will. But even going beyond that, is that going to enough to like satiate our hunger for another Spider-Man, for more Tobey Maguire Spider-Man content? We've had a lot of false promises over the years. Do you remember? Oh God, it's going back a few years now. There was that picture that either got trending on Twitter or whatever it was. It was 4. It was like Spider-Man 4 in a web or
Yes.
something, wasn't it? And it was like, and they left it at that. They left us hanging, and we were like, oh my God, are they actually, is this
And it was a
happening?
countdown. It was a countdown, wasn't it? But they used the Spider-Man font.
Yeah, and it was, is this a film? I think there was rumors that it was going to be a script or something, and then there was rumors that, oh no, it's a comic book. No, they've taken that script and they've turned it into a comic book. And I thought, you know what? I'm never going to get Tobey Maguire on screen again as Spider-Man. I will take that. That's fine. If this was our original version of Spider-Man 4, there you go, Spider-Man fans, enjoy. But then it came out and it was something completely unrelated and not even remotely linked to Raimi's Spider-Man or Tobey Maguire or anyone. And I was absolutely gutted. And now we're a matter of weeks away, and I might be seeing Tobey Maguire in the Spider-Man suit. And it's, we've talked about the possibilities, if it's well received, if it makes a lot of money, which based on ticket sales and how hard it was to get a ticket, I think that's a pretty much a done deal. If Sony look at that and, they're starting their own Sony's Spider-Man universe or whatever it's called. They've got Venom going on, Morbius. They're building up more villains. They're getting Holland into Venom or Venom into Holland's whatever they're going to do. Could they branch out? Could they go, right, we're going to have this Spider-Man running in tandem with this one? They're Warner Brothers doing that with Batman. We've got Michael Keaton Batman. We've got Robert Pattinson's Batman. We've got Affleck's Batman also in that Flash movie too. So technically we're going to have 3 Batmen happening in very close conjuncture around the same time.
Less than a year.
Yeah, and Spider-Man brings in that Sony money. They haven't got many franchises, outside of the tech. If you look at the films, Spider-Man is their cash cow, and they like to make Marvel aware of that. They're like, who wears the trousers in this relationship, Marvel? We've got the rights to Spider-Man. They've got the animated stuff, which is, winning Oscars. It's very well received. It's incredible. So they've got that. They've got all the other stuff. Could we get either one more Raimi film? Could we get like a Logan type film with Tobey Maguire come back, which I know we talk about a lot, like an old man Peter Parker film? Or could we even get another trilogy? I don't know. I pitched that question to you, George. Do you think it's a possibility? Is there a chance?
I'm going to shoot from the hip. I think it's an inevitability. December. You don't just take all of the villains and not the Spider-Man with it. And I'm not going to even talk about the wink with the fan. Not even mention the whole Andrew Garfield's every Q&A. Wrong year for him to release 3 films, potentially before if December comes. But I'm going to put myself into the not shoes of Sony, but if you're a businessman at Sony, right, I'm going to say all my bias out of this. The reason they're making this new film is not because Marvel wants to do the multiverse. They are making this film fundamentally because Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse was an incredible hit financially for an animated film. It won an Oscar. It knocked Disney off their perch. And it showed that you can do a multiverse and explain it to children. Why not do a live action version? And that is what they're doing now. and this kind of not necessarily extends to Andrew Garfield, but I kind of said this to you before we went live. Well, before we start recording, I don't know what level see the light of day, but if either Andrew or Toby are in the new one, I will bet everything I have that Sony do an announcement they're going to move forwards with a Spider-Man TV show or something, and it will be about one of the two Spider-Mans, and it will never happen. It will just be one of those things that's spoken about for years to come.
Mm.
What I would love, which is this is now my selfish stuff, not the business, but the business minor things is we're about to enter Spider Mania. The hype we've had is unparalleled for a Spider-Man film for this new one. And I can be very arrogant and say it's because there's a very good chance Tobey Maguire's coming back. Not just him, but just the concept alone. There are people our age that grew up with people like the Green Goblin and Willem Dafoe, and they're coming back 20 years later. There are people that maybe grew up with Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, technically would have grown up with the MCU anyway. And they think, oh, look, he got a bad time. Now he's got the chance to be in the MCU. And it's about the chance they're getting now. And from a marketing or financial perspective for Sony, who own these characters, it would be senseless to not do something. Now, they're not going to get a video game because they've got a very, very, very successful video game franchise happening right now. I think potentially, I don't even want to say I think one day we get Spider-Man 4. Not as a film, not as a TV show, as a graphic novel, as a book or something. I think what we're about to get with Garfield and Tobey Maguire potentially is a backdoor avenue for Sony to try and fix their errors,
Mhm.
or try and at least give the people, if there are rumors that are true that Sam Raimi and Mark Webb, don't know why Mark Webb was consulted, but he's on the rumor list because it was Avi Arad's Spider-Man films, not his. That they spoke to them about the law and things that would have happened in their worlds between these films, this gap. And we know, like a lot of people, again, Mandalorian's maybe a great example. When there are gaps to be filled in, and people don't want it said to them. They want to see something, they want to read something, they want to play something. And I'm going to go out on a limb and say I'm maybe 10% optimistic, but I don't think post December we've seen the last of either Tobey Maguire or Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man to some capacity.
Mhm.
I would love an old man. I say I'd love a Logan. I don't want to see Tobey Maguire ever die as Spider-Man. No, thank you.
Mhm.
But I just think there's a gap to be plugged in. And I don't want it in 10 seconds of dialogue potentially in December in a
Mhm.
2 hour 40 film about Tom Holland. I don't know if I'm just waffling on, but I just think there's something. And let's take the story aside. We had a lovely chat about Hot Toys today. And I kind of said, there's never really been much. I mean, merch came out when the films did, yes, toys, but the modern era of collectibles, Funko Pops, all that kind of stuff. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the character of Spider-Man. I'm
And
not
the
saying something
20th
like James Bond.
anniversary of the first Raimi film. Perfect time.
Yeah, I think we're going to get a lot of Hot Toys. I think on a set they announced today, it's the black suit Spider-Man from the new film, not this one.
Mhm.
And there's like a Doc Ock, just one of his arms going through the ground over the figure. And I kind of said to you, you don't just put one arm into production, you put four, and you put a man in it too. I think if we get this big resurgence in December, which I think we're going to get, I think they'll start with the merch. They'll start releasing collectibles. Here's a Hot Toys Green Goblin. Here's a Hot Toys Spider Man. Here's a Hot Toys Doc Ock. You'll get your £20 figures like Black Series. I think they call it Marvel Legends. You'll get all of this. I think it's going to reach this incredible peak of Spider Man in the next year that an announcement is made. We're now getting a Tom Holland MCU animated series on Disney Plus about him becoming Spider Man. Few years too late. I don't know if Tom Holland's in
Yes.
actually, but it's the MCU Spider Man. It's about him being at school and becoming Spider Man.
Well, the
Great.
films didn't do a good job of telling that story, did
Yeah.
they? So it takes an animated
And,
series so many years after to tell that story, I guess.
and
But
if they're going back to the pre beginning after a trilogy, why wouldn't they go back to their properties? And also, I guess it is worth adding that they have announced today as well the beloved Amy Pascal, who likes to drop these kind of things. Tom Holland has signed up for another Spider Man trilogy. Didn't say his last, didn't say, oh, it's 3 appearances on a contract. A Spider Man trilogy with Marvel Studios producing it, which is the more important thing.
mhm.
So maybe we've not seen the last of the multiverse. maybe they realize maybe Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield aren't in the new film, and they're now going to do a trilogy to apologize. I'm joking. No,
I'd take that.
I,
I mean, I would take them
I've
not
spoke a
appearing in
lot.
this new film if it meant getting a trilogy with Tobey Maguire again.
I've I've said a lot. I think one the final thing going to Tobey Maguire is, sort of joking aside, there's a resurgence. He's producing the new, what's his name? Is La La Land. Damien Chazelle. He's
Mhm,
producing his new film and he's starring in it. That is his first live action role, I want to say, since 2013 that we know of. So
mhm.
make of that what you will. That Tobey Maguire's coming back into the limelight. I just think we know how Sony work. We know how Sony operate. They won't. Avi Arad might have the ego and awful lot and the assistants, but another thing, sorry, Sam Raimi. Sam Raimi's in with MCU now. He's always been in with Kevin Feige. I'm not going to say they'll team up and do a film, but there is a story to be told. And what format it is, I don't know. But I think we're gonna get whatever happened between Spider-Man 3 and potentially this December at some point in a format we don't know about in the next 5 years.
Mhm. I think next year is going to be the perfect time to do it as well, because I think that, I mean, something can be nostalgic after 10 years for sure, but I think when something hits 20, a well-respected
Yeah.
franchise or film or whatever it happens to be, that's a special number when it hits that. And I think that these definitely are nostalgia worthy, and I'd love to see, more people go back to it. I think this film's going to do absolute wonders for it. The new Spider-Man film that's coming out for it. You mentioned comic books and stuff, and it jogged my memory that I know they did I think they did a Christopher Reeve Superman one and a Michael Keaton Batman one recently
Yeah.
with like continuing on what happened to these characters. We've got Billy D. Williams as Two
Batman
Face in one of them.
66.
Yeah, I've never read any of them, but I've seen the front. It looks really interesting where they go with stuff like that. So I would take that, but I think that we're going to see a lot more stuff, for better or worse. We're going to see a lot more Spider-Man content coming out from Sony, because the next film's going to make them a hell of a lot of money, a hell of a lot of money, and it's nice to see that the interest's still there, though, and I genuinely think that I'm almost getting, maybe not to the same level because I guess Star Wars was different back then, but almost like Force Awakens vibes from this new one
Oh
coming
yeah.
out, because it does have, it's something new, but it's bringing in the old, and hopefully it's going to be entertaining, fun to watch, and good. Like I just hope that it's good first and foremost, but we're seeing a lot of franchises and a lot of things with this nostalgia in mind. I always go to Stranger Things, that 80s nostalgia. We've had the new Ghostbusters film that's come out, obviously going back to some of the old with that, and Star Wars as well, as I just mentioned. We're having a lot of these big franchises, either a new versions coming out or a sequel or whatnot. But going back to that Cobra Kai on Netflix with the Karate Kid franchise, we've seen so much stuff do that. And now it's kind of Spider-Man's turn to do that, I think. And yeah, it's a very exciting time. Not to mention that you've got the new video game that's coming out. Is it either next year or the year after that? The Spider-Man 2 game.
2023. Yeah, Spider.
Uh,
They've had three. They've done Spider-Man 1, Miles Morales, and now they've got the pair of them in a game.
mhm,
And I think that's gonna that could be the next Spider-Man trilogy. I think, just
mhm.
on a side note, obviously
And
we'll
you got,
probably grow.
Into the Spider-Verse 2 kind of tying in with that,
Yeah,
like the same similar kind of storyline. And who can forget Morbius in the new year? We're all looking forward to that one, right? So, as I said, for better or worse, we're going to get more Spider-Man content. But I guess that'll do it for Spider-Man 3 and kind of the future of Spider-Man discussion, really. It turned into in
till
the end. So,
December.
until December, and well, until next week as well, where we'll be talking about Amazing Spider-Man 1, and we've got to follow that up with Amazing Spider-Man 2, haven't we? So that'll do it for our talk on Spider-Man 3. Be sure to let us know your thoughts on Spider-Man 3. Do you hate this film? I think this one is going to be probably divisive if people get commenting. Do you love this one? Do you have nostalgia for it? Have you found acceptance with this film? Or did you hate it back then and you hate it now? Whatever Spider-Man related, whether it's about this or any of the future films, the upcoming film, do let us know, because we are in full-on Spider-Man mode right now and we're loving it. And as I just mentioned, next Wednesday, so that's going to be Wednesday the 8th of December, we're going to have the Amazing Spider-Man discussion. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one to go back to. I think I've only ever seen those films once a piece, to be honest, as and when they came out at the cinema.
I've seen. Oh God, I've seen the Amazing. I've not seen Amazing Spider-Man 2 since the cinema. I watched it twice in like 2 days because I didn't know if I hated it or I liked it, and I went for the former. Um, But no, that's going to be interesting to look at them again. It's more the Garfield stuff, so
Mm.
I'm excited with that. And I think we've got a lot of things coming out by the time this video's up. We mentioned John Malkovich earlier. We'll had a review out for John English that would have been on the channel yesterday. We've mentioned Jared Leto's Morbius. We've had a House of Gucci review come out on the Monday. God, whatever Spider-Man alumni can we talk about that are coming?
Oh God, I'm trying to
Well,
think of any.
we've mentioned a 20th anniversary for something. I'm going to delicately then handle that over to you.
Yep. So, a little film called Lord of the Rings: The Fellowship of the Ring. But we're going to be covering a lot of Lord of the Rings stuff. There's going to be a review on the original 1978 animated film. Basically, all the theatrical Lord of the Rings films that have come out. There's plenty of other ones in between, and maybe we'll get to those at a later date. But it's going to be that animated film, and then towards the end of the month, it's all going to be about that 20th anniversary celebration of Lord of the Rings. We'll have reviews on each one of Peter Jackson's trilogy, which also kind of continues the Peter Jackson retrospective that we started a number of weeks ago. There's going to be watch-alongs, there's going to be quizzes, there's going to be more tier lists as well, because we really enjoyed doing that James Bond one. So it's going to be a little mini Lord of the Rings celebration throughout the month of December. And it doesn't stop there. There's other reviews, there's other retrospectives that are coming out. There's TV show reviews for a show that I may have already mentioned in this discussion. There's a lot of stuff. So December is absolutely rammed. So best place to just keep track of all this stuff, and probably the place that I'm going to be logging on to as well to keep track of all this stuff, is going to be all of our social media links. That's Twitter at cinema_savvy and Facebook and letterbox.com at cinema. Wait a minute. No, I messed that up. Facebook and letterbox.com/cinema savvy. There we go. We've got a lot of stuff, so much stuff coming out. And yeah, that'll be taking us very nicely into 2022. When is Morbius coming out? Is that Jan? Is that Feb?
January the 28th, I think, off the top of my head.
Oh, not far from
But
my
if
birthday.
you want
What
a
a
silver
wonderful
lining,
gift.
if you want a silver lining, it's got Michael Keaton in it playing the Vulture. So
Yes, it has. There we go.
fingers crossed.
Absolutely. Anyway, that will do it for our review, guys. So until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Take care, everyone.